Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the PST Subcommittee, our second to final budget hearing of the season, which is very exciting. We're hearing 4 budgets today, and we will go in the following order: Office of the Attorney General, Maryland Department of Transportation, State Highway, Maryland Department of Transportation, Maryland Transit Administration, and then the Department of State Police. So to kick us off, we have Jacob Polakov with the Office of the Attorney General. If you would like to, your choice.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Again, Jacob Polakov for the Department of Legislative Services for the budget analysis for the Office of the Attorney General. On page 1, we'll see that the Attorney General's operating budget decreases by $11.5 million or 14.8% to $66.1 million in fiscal 2025. On page 2, we have a quick discussion of legislative priorities which have been implemented from fiscal 2024. The fiscal 2024 budget included $548,900 in additional funds for the Office of the Attorney General, contingent on the passage of legislation, which was ultimately enacted. This act granted prosecutorial authority to OAG's Independent Investigations Division. Prosecutions were formally at the discretion of the state's attorney in the jurisdiction of the investigation. The increase in workload for OAG created by this act necessitated the additional funding included in the legislative appropriation, and the Board of Public Works authorized the creation of 4 positions within OAG. We'll talk more about IID in just a couple minutes. On page 3, we have Exhibit 1, which discusses the fiscal 2025 allowance for OAG, which, as I've noted, totals $66.1 million. Legal counsel and advice occupies 23% of the budget. That's the largest portion, followed by the Consumer Protection Division at 21% and the Medicaid Fraud Control Unit at 11%. There is a contingent reduction in this year's allowance. The fiscal 2025 allowance is reduced by $700,000 in general funds, contingent on enactment of a provision in the Budget Reconciliation Financing Act that repeals the mandate requiring that the governor provides $700,000 in general funds for the Consumer Protection Division. As we see in Exhibit 2 on page 4, the fiscal 25 allowance decreases by $11.5 million from last year. The lack of funding for the Maryland Legal Services Corporation's Access to Counsel and Evictions program and the omission of the mandated appropriation for the special fund decreases the budget by $14 million. Other significant changes include $4.7 million for salary increases, including the 2024 COLA, as well as increased rent expenses for the Attorney General's office in Baltimore City. The Access to Counsel and Eviction Special Fund, Chapter 40 of 2022, requires that the governor include $14 million in special funds from the Unclaimed Property Fund in the budget each year for the ACE Special Fund, which MLSC utilizes to operate the program. In fiscal 2024, that funding was included in OAG's legislative appropriation. The mandated funding is not present in the allowance for this year, and OAG should work with the Department of Budget and Management to fully fund the mandate, through a supplemental budget. At the bottom of page 5, we have data regarding OAG's personnel. We see that there is a 7.49% turnover rate set for OAG, and that as of December 31st, 2023, there were 56.4 positions vacant, or 30 more than were needed to meet turnover, good for a 15.64% turnover rate. The Board of Public Works authorized the creation of 8 positions for the Office of the Attorney General in fiscal 2024, which are reflected as existing positions in this analysis. These positions included 4 assistant attorneys general and 4 administrative positions. 4 positions were contractual conversions, while the remaining positions were supported with funding added to OAG's fiscal 2024 appropriation by the General Assembly. The fiscal 2025 allowance adds 11 new positions, including 3 management associates and 8 administrative positions. Of those positions, 9 are in the Securities Division, while the remainder are in Consumer Protection. The new positions result in an additional $567,000 in the fiscal 25 allowance, with other funds being made available due to contractual positions being converted for this purpose. OAG's vacancy rate is currently more than double the budgeted turnover rate. Additionally, the 11 new positions in the fiscal 25 allowance are duplicative of existing vacant positions. Funding is included in the fiscal 25 allowance for the reclassification of vacant positions to allow for hiring at a higher step for vacant positions. Given that OAG's vacancy rate has been above the budgeted turnover rate for several years now, it is prudent to increase the budgeted turnover rate. Increasing the rate from 7.49%, which is what's present in the allowance, to 9.5%, reduces the budgeted amount for OAG by almost $1 million. The Department of Legislative Services recommends that the budgeted turnover adjustment for OAG be reduced by $990,678 for existing regular positions in order to align the budgeted amount more closely with the agency's vacancy rate. On page 7, we have the discussion of the Independent Investigations Division, which gained prosecutorial authority, as I discussed, in fiscal 24. This division was established in 2021 and is tasked with investigating any police-involved death of a civilian in the state or any case involving serious injury. Chapter 632 of 2023 expanded IID's investigatory purview to include those serious injuries, regardless of whether a death is likely to occur, as opposed to previously where the division had been limited to investigating incidents where a death had occurred or was likely. The chapter also granted IID prosecutorial power in the cases that it investigates, whereas prior to this change, prosecutorial authority was solely within the purview of the state's attorney. In fiscal 2023, as we see in Exhibit 3 on page 7, the IID began work on 16 new investigations, in addition to continuing work on 12 pre-existing investigations. The annual report on the work of the IID submitted to the budget committees, as requested in the Joint Chairman's report, indicated that IID responded to 54 cases where investigations were possible in fiscal 2023. The Office of the Attorney General should work with the Department of Budget and Management to add metrics tracking prosecutions by IID to its annual Managing for Results data submission, including total prosecutions and the results of prosecutions. This addition would help with tracking the productivity and efficiency of the unit as it explores its new prosecutorial authority. On page 8, we have a discussion of the Medicaid Fraud Control Unit, where recoveries decreased for a second consecutive year. The Medicaid Fraud Control Unit is required by federal statute as part of the Medicaid program, and this unit within OAG investigates and prosecutes fraud involving the Medicaid system by providers and Medicaid administrators. The MFCU also investigates and prosecutes crimes involving the abuse and neglect of vulnerable adults, as well as crimes involving the ongoing opioid use epidemic. This unit is funded mostly with federal funds and prosecutes both civil and criminal cases. In fiscal 2023, as we'll see in Exhibit 4 on page 8, the MFCU completed 115 total investigations, and cases resulted in $2.5 million in fines, settlements, and overpayments. The MFCU previously recorded more than $30 million in fines, settlements, and overpayments in fiscal 2020 due to several large opioid cases. Many of the opioid cases have since concluded, resulting in a decrease in funds recovered in the last several years. OAG anticipates that smaller cases, which occur with greater frequency, will continue to result in approximately $2.5 million per year in fiscal 2024 and successive years. Smaller spikes in funds recovered are seen in years prior to fiscal 2020, including fiscal 2018, where $15.6 million was recovered. OAG is not currently anticipating any cases which would result in similar spikes. However, based on prior experience, data indicates that existing personnel and resources within the Medicaid Fraud Control Unit will be sufficient to handle any such cases. We next move to the Access to Counsel and Evictions Program, which continues its rollout process in fiscal 2025, building on the progress made in fiscal 2024. This program was established in 2021 and provides a right to counsel in cases of evictions for qualifying individuals. It was created along with the ACE Special Fund, both of which are administered by the Maryland Legal Services Corporation. The legislation also established the ACE Task Force, which has 15 members appointed by the Office of the Attorney General. This task force is responsible for studying potential funding sources, making recommendations to improve the implementation of the program, and evaluating the provision of services provided under the scope of the program. The rollout of the ACE program is a 3-year process with final implementation to be completed by October 1st of 2025. The first phase of the rollout included counsel being offered via the program to qualifying tenants in counties which previously operated their own access to counsel and evictions programs. The current phase of the rollout involves geographic expansion beyond those areas, as well as the implementation of coordinated intake program, which allows tenants to call a hotline and then be routed directly to a provider serving their area who has capacity to take on their case. On page 10, we have Exhibit 5, which shows the numbers of tenants provided with council via the program. We see that Prince George's County and Baltimore County residents use the program most frequently, with 1,093 tenants receiving access to council in Prince George's County and 1,071 in Baltimore County. Funding provided to the program is mainly used to fund legal services grants to providers participating in the program. Funds are also used for administrative costs and tenant outreach and education. The program provided funding to 11 legal services providers in fiscal 2023, totaling $6.6 million. And the full breakdown of the funds provided to the various legal services providers can be found in Exhibit 6 on page 11. As the program expands to all counties in this next phase of the rollout process, MLSC will be adding more legal services providers, and the funds distributed to providers will increase as the number of cases increases. Chapter 40 of 2022 mandates the governor appropriate the previously mentioned $14 million per year to the ACE Special Fund and revenues diverted from the Unclaimed Property Fund. This mandate currently is set to expire after fiscal 2027. These funds were appropriated to MLSC in fiscal 24, as I've noted, via the OAG appropriation. MLSC currently estimates that the program will require more than $25 million for its rollout in fiscal 25, which greatly exceeds the mandated $14 million. Which, as I've noted, is not yet included in the governor's allowance. If the rollout is not fully funded in fiscal 2025, there is a risk that the process of rolling out the program will be delayed beyond the originally planned completion date of October 1st of 2025. And even with the $14 million, which is mandated, the program is at risk of not being fully funded in fiscal 2025. And MLSC needs to work closely with the ACE task force to identify alternative sources of funding for fiscal 25 and future years. The MLSC should comment on recommendations made by the ACE task force for additional funding sources. MLSC should also comment on the amount of funding it expects to need to operate the program on a yearly basis after the conclusion of the rollout process. The Department of Legislative Services recommends the adoption of committee narrative requesting quarterly reports on the implementation of the ACE program in fiscal 2025. Lastly, on page 13, we have the operating budget recommended actions, of which there are two. The first action is to add language reducing the appropriation for the Office of the Attorney General by certain amounts in general funds, special funds, and federal funds to increase the turnover rate for existing positions from 7.49% to 9.5%. The second recommendation is to adopt narrative requesting quarterly reports on the Access to Counsel and Evictions program rollout. With that, I am happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacob. Questions? Senator Jackson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Jacob. A question for you. If you go back to the chart on page 11, so you have a mid-shore pro bono slice, and then you have the homeless persons representation slice. So could you expound on the mid-shore pro bono slice and what makes that?
So these numbers are provided and are presented in this analysis due to their presence in MLSC's quarterly reports from the fiscal 2023 year, where they submitted their 4 quarterly reports. So the breakdown, which is provided to me, is how it makes its way in here. I don't have exact information on each provider.
I'll save it for the agency.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Okay, thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Jacob. I know we have the JCR on eviction data, but can you remind me or find it before they come up after the Attorney General, the average cost per case?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Mr. Attorney General, good to see you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A pleasure to see you as well as the members of the committee. It's an honor and a privilege to be able to testify before you today. We have submitted a written response to Mr. Polikov's analysis. I want to thank him for his diligence, his completeness, his thoroughness, and thoughtfulness in preparing that analysis. So I just want to hit the highlights and really just speak to the 2 recommendations that are made. Always like starting with consensus. So there is universal consensus that the narrative should be adopted in the report for the Access to Counsel and Evictions quarterly reporting. Where there's a disagreement is in regards to the first recommendation, which is to cut our budget by $1 million. I do want to start by saying that the difference, I think, in the recommendation versus our response is probably attributable more to the different set of data that's available to Mr. Polakov at the time that he writes the recommendation and the information that's available to the agency. And let me speak specifically to that. The recommendation to reduce our budget by close to $1 million is based on a vacancy rate of 15.64% as of December 31st, 2023. Today, our vacancy is 9%. And we are on a really strong, steady glide path to close to 0%. I've got a chief operating officer in place. I've got a new HR director. We're now recruiting for a talent acquisition manager, and perhaps even more significant in our ability to reduce our vacancy rate is the good work of the General Assembly last session. You gave our lawyers a pay raise. And there's kind of a latent effect of that, right? You gave us a pay raise. It was effective July 1st. You know, we advertise, we market, we're interviewing, we're recruiting. So we're now beginning to see the benefits of that. So the vacancy rate today is 9%, which is 35 people. And today I can tell you that we have, for those 35 vacancies, we are in different stages of filling those. Some we have offers out to, some we're negotiating the terms of offers, some we're in the hiring process, we're at the panel review process, some of them are scheduled to interview with me over the course of the next few weeks. So if you were to accept this cut, we would be in a situation where likely we'd have to lay people off. One could argue that, no, you don't have to lay them off. You can come back in for a deficiency appropriation. I don't want to be that guy. I don't want to be on that list. I want to fill my positions to budget. I do want to just take maybe 2 minutes to give you a little bit more context about what contributes to the vacancy rate. I think it's important. You know, the Office of the Attorney General is being 300 plus strong when you look at my budget. And those are the lawyers and non-lawyer professionals in consumer protection and criminal appeals and securities and antitrust, the new civil rights division that you gave us last year. However, my HR team is responsible not just for recruiting and filling and retaining and training 300 in our central office. I am also responsible for 6 other members of the Office of the Attorney General that don't reside on my budget. They're on the Maryland State Police budget. They're on the Maryland Department of Transportation's budget. And when we're looking at vacancies, sure, one could say, if I was self-interested and focused just on my numbers, hey, I'm going to let Colonel Butler sit with some vacancies right now because I want to fill consumer protection. I'm going to let the MDOT secretary sit on that vacancy for a purple line attorney because I want my numbers to look good. I don't do that. I look at the needs across the state government enterprise. What are the legal needs? How do I fill them? And if I've got to fill a position for Colonel Butler tomorrow and push off my vacancy for a month, I'm going to do it if the need exists. So I wanted to point that out. The other thing I wanted to point out, I alluded to it before, you gave me 58 new pins last year, and I'm grateful for that. 9 of them were conversions from contract to regular. I can't fill pins, contractual pins for attorneys. So you helped me. You converted 9 conversions to regular. You gave me 49 new pins, civil rights, IID, criminal, Medicaid fraud, securities. So I'm filling these positions. So there's a reason why on December 31st, my vacancy rate was what it is. So we're really excited. We've hired and promoted 220 people in the Office of the Attorney General in the last 12 and a half months. So we're really excited. Please enable us to continue the forward progress. The last thing I will say, and you can't find it anywhere in the numbers, it's not reflected anywhere. I didn't realize it and appreciate it until I became the Office of the Attorney General. We provide a lot of legal services to our clients that we don't even get paid for. And when the General Assembly creates a new program, initiative, or fund, or an extension of a commission or a task force, we, with joy and glee, we say, hey, we're going to provide that legal support, but we often don't get the corresponding resources to do it. But we do it anyway. We're professionals, and we'll continue to do that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. If you could, Exhibit 6, if you could talk to me about that a little bit. So I see the Pro Bono Resource Center down the bottom, 27% of that, those dollars. And then if you come around, you have the other, you have CASA, you have Midshore Pro Bono. And if you just could expound on that a little bit and why those are two separate.
Yeah, Senator Jackson, that's better for, I think, Lorenzo Bellamy's here on behalf of MLCS.
Okay, that's fine.
This is really just a pass through.
I got you.
Yeah.
No problem.
Anything for the,
Oh, yeah. So could you, I know last year, I think it was last year, we passed the environmental crimes unit. Could you give us an update where you are with that?
Absolutely. We're excited about our environmental crimes and natural resources unit. And we are grateful that you established greater authorities for us to enforce, particularly the natural resources side. We were already doing the environmental side. We're now doing natural resources. We're picking up a lot of great cases. I don't have numbers to report. We're working with DNR police. We're working with state's attorneys on some really significant cases. I will say that this last year, 2023, we had the largest criminal case, an environmental crimes case in the state of Maryland, a plea deal, which resulted in $1 million of penalty, criminal penalty to the state of Maryland, injunctive relief. And we're still considering prosecuting one individual in connection with that. I'm really excited that not only the $1 million penalty, but also a supplemental environmental project that's going to go into Curtis Bay, and the Chesapeake Bay Trust is going to administer grants for that. So it's a very active unit. I will point out that we expanded that unit without additional resources from the General Assembly, but working in partnership with the Secretary of the Department of Natural Resources, he was able to reclassify one PIN. We really do need more resources, I think, to be able to ramp up to the level of what you want us to do on the natural resources front.
I appreciate that, Madam Chair. One more. So, Mr. Attorney General, my last question for right now. The ID, your relationship with the law enforcement agencies in the state. Could you speak to how that's been over the last 12, 13 months?
Sure. So as you recall, and Mr. Pollicott mentioned, the General Assembly extended to the Office of the Attorney General IID, the prosecutorial authority. We have exclusive authority. It required us to develop protocols and to modify existing protocols that we have regarding the investigations. We work closely with our law enforcement partners. We did a lot of one-on-one meetings with the Maryland State Police, with law enforcement agencies around the state. We did a lot of one-on-ones. We did collective meetings. We sent out drafts of our protocols, received comments and input, made changes to it. I think the relationship is strong, but let's not kid ourselves. I mean, these are the most difficult cases you're going to have. The Maryland State Police, we have an extraordinary relationship with them. On the one hand, they are our client, right? And we advise, we counsel, we represent. They're also our partner, right? Think about our criminal division, and we partner with them on investigating and prosecuting crimes, as we do with the Baltimore City Police and ATF, et cetera. But we also have another relationship with them and other law enforcement agencies, and that is the IID function. So regardless of whether you're a sworn officer in the Maryland State Police or the Harford County Sheriff's Department or the Prince George County Police Department, we are obligated to investigate, and if the facts lead us in that direction, to prosecute police in police-involved deaths and other scenarios, as mentioned by Mr. Polikoff, if that's where the facts take us. There's an inherent strain in that relationship, right? And the sworn officers that you see behind me, I'd like to believe that they believe that as their attorney, we are fully committed to the department, and that as the prosecutor of the IID unit, that we're going to be fair, impartial, we're going to be unbiased and objective in our approach. No matter how much I say that, the proof will be in the pudding. But it will always, I think, include a certain level of friction and stress. And it's ours, the leadership that you see behind me. They're not here with me. They've got their own budget hearing. And my leadership in my office, that's for us to manage. We have to manage that professionally. So I think it's going well. But it doesn't come without some stress and strain.
I certainly understand that. Understanding, you were also the attorney for the sheriffs as well, so I do know that personally. Let me lastly, with the state attorney's offices across the state and the city, and I'll stop there, Madam Chair.
Oh,
The relationship as this transition. This is a needed transition. It's something that we're going to all have to work on, and there are going to be bumps in the road. But I just want your perspective on how this transition has been going for you and how we may be able to help
with the IID.
Yes.
Yeah. It's interesting because, during the hearings last year before the Senate and the House, there were ample number of state's attorneys who came down and testified in opposition, full-throated opposition. I get it. And without attributing it to any one state's attorney, I can assure you that at least more than one came up to me after the fact and said, thank God that you now have that authority. But look, the transition I think has been smooth. We still, when there's an incident that we respond to, there's a level of communication with the state's attorney, letting them know, hey, we're in your county, we're in your jurisdiction, this is what we're doing, because there often, or at least occasionally, can be an underlying crime or offense that they're going to investigate. So we've got to cooperate and coordinate to make sure that they can get the evidence for that particular offense, and we can do our investigation for the police, for the officer involved incident. So we work well together. I think that it really has helped to diffuse, I think, some of the stress and strain that existed mostly by my predecessor, because Brian Frosch stood it up and he had the lion's share of the investigations before I arrived, although we had plenty in 2023. But I think it's really eliminated that, because we're all professionals and we're going to have different views on how to investigate a major incident. Right. So when you create the IID, you said, okay, Attorney General, you investigate. Okay, well, we're doing it this way. And you have a state's attorney looking at it saying, I probably would go in a different direction. Rightly so, fairly so, reasonably so. It created tension. So that's been eliminated because it's now structurally, I think, reflects best practices. Whoever investigates should prosecute.
Thank you, Senator. And your line of questioning, maybe I'm going to respectfully request, so I don't have to put it as a JCR, Mr. Attorney General, but I think we would love to learn more about your progress on the Natural Resources Unit. So if you could perhaps handshake agreement July 1st, would that work for you all?
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I can probably even do, I can get you numbers sooner rather than later, and we'll do that.
Well, to your point, I think we want you to be successful. So if we take some time during this interim to work with you to figure out where your needs are, we can come back in the next session to get you what you need.
Excellent.
If that works for you. Okay. Second line of questioning that Senator Jackson brought up is, and I want to thank you for taking the time this week to sit down privately and discuss this, but I want to give you the opportunity to discuss your relationship, particularly in Baltimore City, and the work that you're doing with State's Attorney Bates, U.S. Attorney Barron. The coordination between your offices is incredibly important. Just want to make sure you have time to kind of brief us on that as well.
Sure. When you talk about the investigation and prosecution of criminal offenses, there are sort of two sets of partnerships that come into play. One is the partnership, the coordination, cooperation, communication between prosecutors. So you've got the U.S. Attorney, the State's Attorney, the Office of the Attorney General through our organized crime unit. There are some things that each of us do that some of us don't do, and vice versa. So, for example, the U.S. Attorney, they don't do juvenile offenses. There's a lot of concern about the spike in juvenile carjackings and in firearm offenses by juveniles. So the U.S. Attorney doesn't do that, but they do a lot of other things, and they do it well. The state's attorney, and you asked about Baltimore City, may be looking at a group or gang activity Yet they're looking at Baltimore City because they don't have the jurisdiction to go into Baltimore County. That doesn't mean that there's not cooperation across lines. Whereas the Office of the Attorney General, you've given us that multi-jurisdictional jurisdiction. So the point I'm making is that there's communication, there's cooperation, because there are things that each of us do and don't do. So that's number one. I would submit the more important partnership, that's his second group, is between prosecutors and law enforcement. Because at the end of the day, while you see prosecutors, and I'm guilty of it too, at the microphone announcing we took down 33 defendants, okay, took X number of guns off the street and drugs off the street and crime money off the streets. It's not Anthony Brown, Ivan Bates, and Eric Barron who's out there doing the hard work. It's these guys. And I had the privilege of observing a takedown one morning, and there must have been 15 law enforcement agencies that met at 4:30 in the morning, SWAT teams and all sorts of stuff. They're getting together, they're talking, they're coordinating. They show up at 15 different sites. You could set your watch to it at the same time. They all went in, they did their knocks, they had their warrants, they went in, they cleared. It was professional and it was dangerous. And I had the luxury of coming in 2 hours later after they did the hard work and to see what they walked into. And I can tell you right now, it's a scary thing to walk into. Walk into a stash house, walk into a defendant's residence. You don't know what's around the next corner, what's upstairs, who's downstairs, et cetera. That's the partnership that you have to have. So the way it works is, and we've gone to all the police chiefs, particularly in the big jurisdictions, we said, this is what we do in the organized crime unit. Now, these guys may do this and these guys may do this, and we're not speaking to that. This is what we do, right? We do wires and we do them really well. We instruct and teach a lot of states' attorneys on how to do effective wires. We're doing wires in Anne Arundel, we're doing wires in Baltimore, we're doing them in Howard, we're doing them all over the place, right? Say, this is what we do. We're open for business. And we get a lot of business. In fact, I think, did we provide the handout, the organized crime unit handout? Did we distribute it?
Yes.
You have a fairly thick handout of our activities in 2023. Stuff that was started before 2023 that we completed in 23, stuff that we started in 23 that we completed in 23, and stuff that we started in 23 that is ongoing. We're busy, but we're busy because law enforcement, Maryland State Police, Baltimore City, ATF, DEA, they know that we're value added. They bring us good business. We investigate and we prosecute with them as our partners. So those are the two sets of partnerships that you have to have. And I would submit that the more important partnership is prosecutors with law enforcement.
I appreciate that coordination. Thank you very much. Let's talk about Medicaid fraud. Just looking at trends, we continue to not recover as much as we used to. Could you speak to, is there something internally that you see that we can't see yet as to why we had that large spike in 2020? Just can you give us some context there, please?
Sure. And I think as Mr. Polakov accurately captured, and based on the information that we provided, that spike was a lot of opioid related. When we say opioid, that's not opioid litigation that you think of like last week's announcement of the $268 million settlement with Walgreens and what have you. That's a different opioid. We're talking about the recoveries when we're going after like pill mills and things like that. So that's dropped off. Now, I will say that last year again, and we're grateful, you did help us expand our Medicaid fraud and vulnerable victims unit. That's what we call it now. We don't call it Medicaid fraud and I don't even know what the other one was, corruption unit or something like that. Control. People are like, what does that mean? We say, yeah, let's change it to what they do. So we changed to vulnerable victims because, as you now know, that unit can investigate even when it's not Medicaid involved. So we changed Medicaid fraud, vulnerable victims unit. So you helped us plus up that unit. You gave us more pins and more resources. It's a good deal because it's 75% funded by the federal government. So we're building that unit, a new team. So we should see more activity with that additional team. The other piece, and I'll make a pitch now on the authority side. So when you go to vote on the Senate floor, you'll support it. We're asking for authority to enforce the patient's bill of rights in nursing homes. Right now, we're only authorized to enforce the patient dumping. But we think there are other violations of the Patient Bill of Rights that we should be able to enforce. We're asking for that. We're also asking, and there's a bill that's being heard today, I think, to expand the Patient Bill of Rights to assisted living facilities and give us the enforcement authority there. So I think with that, and even without that, but with that, plus the additional team that you gave us, we should see, I'm not going to say a spike up, right? But we should see, and I know we said in here, probably we don't foresee it, but on further reflection, there is a possibility that we will see an upward trend as we put more boots on the ground to do the investigations and the enforcement.
Appreciate that. Thank you. And that leads me to my final question. I say this every time we're here in this room, but we can see some policy challenges or opportunities through the budget that maybe our folks and friends in the policy committees don't yet see. What is keeping you up at night besides the Medicaid issues that we just discussed, which I appreciate that insight? What kind of trends or needs or unmet needs are you seeing from your vantage point that we should be considering via the budget policy?
You know, I'd like to sit here and tell you something about, crime or civil rights, but we've talked a lot about that and I've papered that. There's a really, it's an issue that it's not going to be front page. It's not going to be above the fold, but truly I like that you asked me like what keeps me up at night, because it's when I go to bed at night, I'm always thinking about the legal issues of the Office of the Attorney General, because I spend a lot of my day working those issues. But when I wake up in the morning, I'm always thinking about the organizational issues. Am I providing the state of Maryland with the best quality, the most efficient and effective legal services? And the answer today is no, I'm not. I'm not. The Office of the Attorney General is an organization that I don't believe really reflects the needs of this huge client, the state of Maryland. And I'm gonna give you one example. We're gonna be working with DBM on this. And I think Mr. Polakov and we spoke about this yesterday for the first time. MTA, I'm not gonna speak about MTA because I haven't had this conversation with MTA yet. We have to look at how we are managing litigation in the state. There are agencies across the state that are litigating each and every day. Mm-hmm. And I think we should have a specialized litigation group that litigates for the entire state. I can develop a level of expertise and competence, I think, at a lower cost than we're currently doing it. So I'm going to work with the General Assembly, with DBM, with my clients to do that. The same on employment or personnel law matters. And you'll often hear, like, for example, ASME will come in and you'll hear them say, hey, sometimes there are inconsistent interpretations before the labor relations boards and the way cases are handled. Well, that's because I've got AAGs across the enterprise that are doing this work. I think I can better serve the people of Maryland, the state government, if I have an employment law unit, just like I have a contract litigation unit, right? So these are not sexy items, but what really, I wake up to every morning is how can I better serve the people of Maryland, the state of Maryland, in providing the best legal services. And right now we're doing an excellent job, but I don't think anyone in this room wakes up believing that my excellent job, your excellent job is the very best that you can be. So we're providing a level of excellence, but we know that we can always be better.
That's really helpful. And the best time to talk about a budget issue is a year before, so we can actually help you out next year instead of this. Okay. Seeing no further questions of folks who are here, thank you very much.
Thank you,
Mr. Attorney General. We have two witnesses signed up. Michelle Siri, who I did not see unless she's outside, but I do see Mr. Bellamy. We'll talk about it. And Ms. Bellamy, thank you for being here. We do follow full committee rules, so 2 minutes if that's okay. Thank you.
That's fine. Thank you. Just real quick, Ms. Siri is unavailable today. She has a family emergency. So good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Lorenzo Bellamy. I'm here on behalf of the Maryland Legal Services Corporation to basically respond to some of the questions and the excellent presentation by Mr. Polakov on our issues. I'm not going to regurgitate the numbers that we need, the dollar figures. I think he's pretty clear what we need. We're hoping that we can get the $14 million in the supplemental, as well as the $6 million that was for the ACE funding. We'd like to thank the Attorney General for his support of Legal Services Corporation, and also the access to counsel and evictions process and task force. Senator Jackson, if I may answer your question about the chart on Exhibit 6 related to the Midshore Pro Bono and Pro Bono Resource Center. I believe that was your question about. So just so you know, Legal Services Corporation provides grants to 46 grantees. This chart here is an example of some of the organizations that Legal Services provides funding to. The Midshore Pro Bono organization, which is actually now called Shore Legal Access, based in Easton and Cambridge on the Eastern Shore, provides staffing and support to those folks on the Eastern Shore that meet the eligibility criteria and need support. The Pro Bono Resource Center is run through the Maryland State Bar Association. And again, that also is a lawyer referral organization or process program through the Bar Association for those individuals that need services, legal services, but cannot afford the fees that attorneys would normally charge. I hope that answers your question.
I appreciate that, Ms. Bellamy. Can you give us some sort of update on how your last year has been with this program since we put it in place, and what you foresee next year?
Which is the reason why we're asking for additional money. The program is.
I understand. What I'm asking for is something in writing to the committee.
Absolutely, I will do that.
And you can expound on whatever you want to right now, but if you could, so we can kind of follow your progress, and so we can better look. I mean, the chair said it. This is something we talk about all the time. We're everyone's partner, but we can only be a partner if we know what you need. So
Absolutely.
the 9 months are better than the 90 days. Trust
Absolutely.
us to try to get to what you need. So if you could do that, so we can kind of understand what we're doing. We're supportive of this program. It's a much needed program. But if we can see how your resources need to be used and why they're being used there, then we can better help.
Senator, we have an annual report, and we'll make sure that we get that to you, as well as any additional information that expounds on the numbers and the programs that we've been doing over the last year or so.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, if I may continue just very briefly, to answer the question about what is Legal Services Corporation doing to sort of supplement the additional funding that we need. One is we would like to see the sunset provision that's on the abandoned property fund removed. Right now it goes to 2027. We're also seeking funding through the filing fee, the governor's renters rights stabilization bill, and increasing the filing fees for evictions in the courts. That also would be helpful. That's my 2 minutes, I guess.
Right on the line. And forgive us, we are not on the policy committees making those decisions, but
Correct.
on the governor's bill that you just spoke of, is there currently a carve out that exists for your services?
So we would get a percentage of the surcharge.
Okay.
That goes to Legal Services Corporation.
Okay. And what is that estimated to generate?
I know it goes to $93
Okay.
from the current 15, which still puts us at the lowest in the country.
Right.
But I'm not sure exactly how much that would
Okay.
generate.
And I know I don't mean to pressure you on these questions when
That's fine.
I'll talk to Ms. Siri about this afterwards. Jacob, could you possibly pull that fiscal note for us before we discuss it further? Thank you. And then, this, we had quarterly reporting JCR language for you all last year, and we discussed it quite a bit over the interim. I don't think there's a member of the General Assembly who isn't grateful for the work that you all do. We are just, again, as bean counters, appropriators, slightly concerned with the higher cost per case than kind of the only ways we can compare you to other peer access to counsel programs. I think it's just over $1,000 per case, and I believe that part of the reasoning it's higher is because of startup costs, marketing costs, things like that. We would,
Yes.
as appropriators, we would love to see a greater efficiency of that funding, particularly as a result in people staying housed. I think that's the ultimate goal here, is to find some resolution for your clients and keeping roofs over heads. So I would just suggest whatever you can do to get down that average cost of case. I appreciate they're complex cases in a lot of circumstances, but at the same time, we have to be good stewards of the public money. So we want to see greatest bang for our buck here.
We will do that. For you.
Thank you very much.
And we also agree with the recommendation for the quarterly reports, and we will be doing that as well.
I appreciate that. And how would you measure, final question, how would you measure success? Is it keeping people housed? Is it helping folks enter into long-term payment agreements when there is a dispute? what are your metrics for yourself?
We would prefer for people to be housed and not evicted, right? I think that's sort of the last resort. I don't think even landlords want to evict people. So it is our goal to make sure people can stay in their homes as long as possible. If they can reach agreements with the landlords, that's fine, but we want to make sure that they have representation when they're being potentially evicted. So that would be success for us, that they could stay in their homes as long as possible and reach some sort of agreement.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate being here.
Thank you.
Okay, with that concludes our hearing for the Attorney General, and now we are moving on to MDOT State Highway Administration. I know the Secretary was in the hall. Perfect timing. Okay. Stephen, when you are ready.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. You should have a document in front of you, State Highway Administration, Maryland Transportation Department.
So sorry, Stephen. I thought that was on me. It's supposed to be MTA. I apologize.
No problem.
Musical chairs.
Yep.
I had it written down and everything. Mr. Secretary, is that okay? Okay. Thank you, Carrie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Carrie Cook to present the analysis for the MDOT Maryland Transit Administration. Beginning on page 1, the FY 2025 proposed budget increases 59.4 million or 5.3% to 1.2 billion. The budget as introduced contained approximately 97 million in operating reductions, which we'll speak about a little bit later in the presentation. However, about 61 million of these reductions were restored by supplemental budget number 1. On the capital side, on page 2, the fiscal 2025 budget increases 54.1 million or 8.9% to 660.4 million. And similarly, the budget as introduced contained about 15 million in capital reductions from anticipated spending levels, but some of those reductions were restored by the first supplemental budget. I also wanted to mention here, Madam Chair, BRFA provision on the capital side, which would alter the requirement for procuring zero emission buses. So currently under statute, MTA is required to procure 100% of their buses that they need to buy each year to support their fleet as zero emission buses. The BRFA provision would change that to be 25% of buses. So this would present a cost savings in terms of the capital costs in the CTP, since the sort of per bus cost for the efficient diesel buses is lower, but it also would address some supply chain issues that they have in terms of procuring the EV buses as well. So moving into some of our sort of data side here, page 6 begins the discussion of the managing for results. So in terms of the ridership, we talked about this last year, of course. Exhibit 2 shows the ridership by mode compared to calendar 2019 for this past year, calendar 2023. As you can see, mobility services are 90%, as these are the folks who are really relying on these services for their day-to-day transportation. MTA as a whole is at about 65% of 2019 levels. The lowest mode is commuter bus at about 35%. Exhibit 3 on page 7 shows the on-time performance goals. So you can see the black lines here is the goal for each of the modes meeting their on-time performance threshold. And in fiscal 2023, MARC service and mobility paratransit service both met their goal, and they had 94% of on-time service. Exhibit 4 on page 8 shows fare box recovery. So this is no longer in statute, but what this is the percent of operating expenditures that are recovered by fare box revenue. So obviously during the pandemic, there was a sharp decline in this as there were far fewer riders and less fare box revenue. But you can see here how they're doing in terms of the revenue. So not great recovery in terms of the pandemic, but obviously, you know, less ridership is going to lead to fewer fare box recovery. Exhibit 5 on page 9 is the transit performance measures for core bus, light rail, and metro. These are federally defined FTA measures. So we're seeing passengers per revenue mile. This is the amount of folks on each transit vehicle per the revenue mile that it's traveling. So we want that to increase. And then operating cost per passenger trip and revenue mile, which we want to be decreasing. So the most recent data available for these measures is fiscal 2022. So a year behind most of the other measures that we discussed. So you can see the spike here, those purple bars is due to the pandemic plummet in ridership. And finally, Exhibit 6 on page 11 is local bus performance compared to peer systems on those same three measures as the previous exhibit. So you can see that the Baltimore system performs favorably in terms of operating expenses per passenger trip and passenger trips per vehicle mile, but the operating expenses per revenue vehicle mile is a little bit above the average of all the other local peer systems. So turning now to the FY 2025 budget, Exhibit 7 on page 12 is the overview of agency spending. So you can see that bus operations is almost exactly half of their operating budget for FY 2025. Exhibit 8 on page 13 shows the proposed budget change. So there's an increase of 21.5 million for personnel expenses due to statewide salary actions, in addition to quite a few new positions, which we'll discuss in a few moments. We also have some changes on the operational side. The largest one is a private security contract for MTA employee facilities. I just wanted to highlight this. This is really seeking to close the gap in terms of security for MTA facilities where there are not members of the public. So MTA police patrol, where there are public members, bus stops and things like that, but there's currently not security service at employee-only areas like bus depots. So they're looking to procure a contractor to fill that need. We also have some changes with the transit service contracts. These often change year to year just based on ridership, overhead, and things like that. You can see a sharp decrease in terms of the contract for commuter bus services, which we'll discuss in just a few moments. Some technical adjustments are on page 14 as well. So as I mentioned just a moment ago, there were some budget reductions that were included in the fiscal 2025 budget as introduced for MTA. Those are bulleted on page 14 and 15. So they fall into 4 buckets. One is commuter bus services. So as introduced, the fiscal 2025 budget eliminated this program entirely. However, additional funding made available in supplemental budget 1 restored 28 million of this funding, enabling MTA to reduce service on commuter bus rather than eliminating it entirely. So they did release a formal plan for this at the end of last month, but essentially they would be removing service on some of the lines. Some of the lines would be reduced frequency and 2 of the lines would remain unchanged. Another item that was reduced in the budget as introduced is locally operated transit systems, which is the grant funding to localities for various transit purposes. However, the supplemental budget fully restored this amount to the anticipated fiscal 2025 levels. We also had some reductions to MARC services and state of good repair funding, which were both fully restored to anticipated 2025 levels in the supplemental budget. At the bottom of page 15 here, I just wanted to note that while commuter bus is the only item that was impacted by the reductions given the supplemental budget, MTA notes that absent significantly increased resources, similar reductions for these items will be made in fiscal 2026, just given the realities of the structural challenges on the TTF. Moving now to personnel, which is on page 16 and 17. MTA has 5.2% vacancy rate as of January, with about 63 vacancies above turnover. The big story with their personnel this year is the addition of 108 additional positions in fiscal 2025 to improve transit reliability. So you can see in the bulleted list here on page 16, these positions are really all over the agency. So we have some managers to support the frontline staff, administrative staff, including HR to process all of these new PINs, planning staff to oversee some of the new transit projects that are in the pipeline, and safety staff and managers as well. There was also an additional 10 positions in the supplemental budget, and I regret that the good senator is not here to hear that it is indeed for an apprenticeship program for EV buses. Moving now to federal discretionary grants on Exhibit 9, page 18. So this exhibit summarizes the grants that MTA was awarded and are pending in federal fiscal years 22 through 24. I will just mention that a pretty substantial grant for the light rail vehicle replacement project was recently announced, $213.7 million, and that will enable the agency to replace the entire light rail fleet, in addition to some state match and federal formula funding to go to that project as well. Exhibit 10 on page 19 shows the capital spending by category in the CTP. So you can see a slight jump in expansion and efficiency in fiscal 2027, and that has to do with timelines associated for both the purple line and the red line project in terms of that expansion and efficiency category. Exhibit 11 on page 20 and 21 shows the breakout for all the projects that were funded in fiscal 2025, which is a total of 671 million. Exhibit 12 on page 22 shows the capital cash flow changes. So this is how the 2024 budget is now in the working appropriation versus last year as introduced. And that's just due to timeline changes in various projects. These things, tend to happen with projects of this size. Exhibit 13 on page 23 is just a breakout of all the projects that are included in that bar graph listed out line by line. And exhibit 14 on page 25 is the cash flow changes from the fiscal 2025 working to the fiscal 25 allowance. So you can just see the changes in how these projects are being funded year to year. Exhibit 15 on page 27 and exhibit 16 on page 28 and 29 is the requirement to identify first year programmed and ongoing program spending. So identifying the projects that are receiving funding for the first time, either in the design side or in the construction side. And exhibit 17 on page 30 shows the major changes from the previous CTP in terms of projects added to the construction program and projects added to the D&E program. So I'll now turn to the issues, beginning on page 31. First is an update on some of the major transit projects that MTA is embarking on. First issue is regarding the purple line and the delays associated with it. So much of what I have written is now moot given the announcement that just came out today. But the first couple paragraphs on page 31 discuss the Board of Public Works approval in July 2023 of a delay to the project, which increased the contract amount and delayed revenue service from fall 2026 to spring 2027. And just a few moments ago, an announcement from MTA went out that they are going to seek Board of Public Works approval for an additional delay, which is similarly associated with utility relocation challenges, pushing the revenue service availability to winter 2027, and will also include an additional payment to Purple Line Transit Partners of $425 million. So I've asked the agency to discuss how the additional delay and contract modification may impact other projects and priorities, particularly given current strain on the TTF and potential anticipated budget reductions in fiscal 2026. DLS has also recommended budget bill language, which we have had for the past 2 years, requiring MTA to provide bi-monthly status reports on the Purple Line. Moving now to some other major transit projects. In June 2023, the governor publicly announced his intention to resurrect the Red Line project. So this is something that the MTA was already undergoing in terms of the regional transit plan for Southern Maryland, which identified both an east-west and a north-south corridor in the Baltimore area. So MTA anticipates announcing the preferred mode for the Red Line, which will either be bus rapid transit or light rail transit this spring. And they anticipate additionally announcing a locally preferred alternative, meaning where exactly the route and the stops will be, and the extent of the tunneling and surface options later in this calendar year. The Red Line does receive funding in the development and evaluation section of the CTP, not in the construction section, since they're still undergoing all of these planning stages. It's programmed to receive about $98 million through the 6-year program. I also have a little bit of information here about the North-South corridor, which is that other study from the Central Maryland Plan. And they expect the corridor study to begin the alternatives analysis phase, which is sort of what the Red Line is in now, this spring. So similarly, they have both identified alternatives that they have published information online, getting public feedback about these different options. Southern Maryland Rapid Transit was also added to the D&E program in this year's CTP, which will provide rapid transit along Route 5 and 301 near Waldorf. The CTP programs $24.9 million for this phase of the project, with $3.6 million in fiscal 2025. So MDOT is currently undergoing NEPA process coordination with Charles and Prince George's counties. The second issue regards safety and maintenance and state of good repair. So I just wanted to touch on some issues that occurred over the summer with MTA. In July, MTA suspended service on the entire metro station for 5 days due to an electrical fire at a substation. The fire was caused by improper installation of an electrical device by an MTA contractor. There was some property damage as well as one minor injury to a staff MTA train operator. MTA provided bus service along the metro corridor as an alternative for customers during the shutdown. However, it should be noted that, as you can imagine, bus service along the metro corridor is going to take a lot longer. And they also pooled bus vehicles and operators from the existing fleet for this service, meaning that the regular bus service was impacted. MTA has instituted some additional training and protocol changes that I'm sure that they can discuss in response to this incident, and they are still working with legal counsel to calculate the total cost of the incident and the repairs. In December, there was a similar situation with the light rail system. They shut down the system on December 8th to perform emergency inspections and repairs regarding concerns for punctured conduit cables. So staff and contractors inspected every vehicle in the fleet and performed repairs. They resumed service on December 23rd and also offered free ridership to customers until January 2nd. They sort of, as I understand it, inspected each vehicle and then put it back in the fleet as it passed the inspections, and then was able to reopen service to riders just before Christmas. An evaluation similar to the Metro of costs incurred from this event is ongoing, but MTA does anticipate that all expenses associated with the light rail event will be reimbursed by the overhaul contractor. I also just very briefly wanted to discuss state of good repair in general, as I know that it's something that has been coming up a lot recently. So state of good repair is something that's a little bit loosely defined. Generally, it's understood as assets are performing at the level intended, sort of when, by manufacturing specifications. So different transit organizations define it in different ways, but MTA calculates it by adding up certain subcategories in their CTP. So essentially, they're totaling everything in terms of preservation of the system, safety and security, environment issues. They're totaling up everything except for expanding the system and support to locals. This is also an important consideration in terms of eligibility for federal awards. So I know that that's something folks have been thinking about with big transit projects coming down the pipeline. So FTA does have a definition of state of good repair in terms of eligibility for federal capital grants, which is right there on page 34. And I also just quickly wanted to touch on the mandate. So page 35 describes the mandated level of state of good repair funding that was established by chapters 11 and 20 of 2021. So you can see it has specific dollar amounts for each year here. The budget as introduced did reduce state of good repair funding, and there was a corresponding BRFA item to relieve the mandate of about $11 million. They wanted to take it from that $450 million down to $439 million. However, additional funding in the supplemental budget brought it back up to the mandated level. So for that reason, DLS recommends striking the provision in the BRFA since they are going to meet the mandate for fiscal 2025 with the supplemental budget. Finally, the MTA released a capital needs inventory in 2022, which touches on some of these issues in terms of the investment needed to keep their entire system in a state of good repair. So that report identified $5.1 billion in state of good repair needs over the next 10 years, $8.1 billion of which is deferred capital maintenance or the state of good repair backlog. The report further noted an average of $512 million per year would be needed to maintain or bring all assets into a state of good repair. And so that $512 million is significantly higher than the mandated amounts for state of good repair that's at the top of the page there. So for that reason, DLS just requests that MTA discuss current funding levels, not meeting figures cited in the CNI report to ensure the system is in a state of good repair, with a particular focus on how underfunding state of good repair may impact federal award eligibility. The last issue in the analysis surrounds service reliability on page 36. So there are some new initiatives that the agency has taken on this topic, including launching an Office of Customer Experience to engage directly with riders and releasing an online customer experience database. in addition to over 100 new positions in the agency, as I mentioned earlier, to really just support transit reliability across the system. MTA notes that service delays are often a result of vacancies or absenteeism, and that is also something that they have improved on. Last year, their vacancy rate was about 8.8%, and it's down to 5.2%. And that vacancy rate decrease is similar in those frontline operator positions as well. I also wanted to highlight just a few issues in terms of service reliability that have also come up in the last year. One of them is the U.S. Department of Justice highlighting issues with paratransit service in calendar 2021 and 2022. So these are not new issues. These are really the service issues regarding paratransit that we discussed in last year's analysis, but the DOJ report came out in the past year in June 2023. So I won't go through everything, but there are some remedial measures that the DOJ identified the agency should undertake, which are listed in Appendix 1. I will note that MTA was fully cooperated with the investigation, responded to the letter of findings from the Department of Justice, and has indicated their willingness to collaborate in terms of continuing to improve the system. So just given that investigation and its findings, DLS recommends that MTA describe progress on implementation of the recommended actions to achieve full compliance with the Americans with Disabilities Act. Another service reliability issue that has come up is agency operated buses for school children. So MTA is required by law to provide transit for school children within Baltimore City. Language included in the fiscal 2024 budget bill restricted funding in MTA and the Secretary's office pending a report on this issue. Exhibit 18 on page 38 shows these supplemental trips. So these are just bus trips for school children, not regular bus trips throughout the city. Shows that 81% of trips during the 2022 through 23 school year were on time or early, and 14% were 7 to 15 minutes late, with a smaller portion being 15 or more minutes late. So this is a service that MTA provides by law, and they did sort of a self-audit of these services, if you will, during the school year to provide this data to the committees on the performance. Finally, MTA also launched a youth transit council in November 2023 to sort of engage more directly with some of these younger riders. So DLS recommends that MTA discuss the Youth Transit Council and the Office of Customer Experience and how these initiatives can address current and future concerns surrounding transit reliability. The operated budget recommended action, as I mentioned earlier, is to continue the annual language, restricting $100,000 in the budget pending bi-monthly reports on Purple Line Light Rail project progress. And the PAYGO recommended budget action is to concur with the governor's allowance. That concludes my formal presentation. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Carrie. Mr. Secretary, and thank you for being here, and congratulations on the light rail funding. It's a big deal. I'm sorry, Senator Jackson, you have a question for Carrie? Okay.
Thank you for your presentation. If you look at page 13, private security contract for MTA employee facilities.
Yes.
Is there grant fundings available for those, or are they coming out of the agency's budget?
As far as I am aware, it is just coming out of the agency's budget. I know there was an incident a few years ago that occurred at one of the agency's bus depots. And so I believe that, some of the impetus to go into the security contract was a result of that. But I see Holly's nodding, so I'm sure she'd be happy to discuss it further.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Please.
Okay, thank you. For the record, Paul Wiedefeld, Secretary of Transportation. With me is Holly Arnold, the head of the MTA. Thank you, Carrie, for your thorough analysis. I will just mention that we actually had an incident today at our Bush Division. So it is very important that we get those security guards there as quickly as we can. As you all know, transit plays an integral part in Maryland's transportation system. Hundreds of thousands of Marylanders rely on MTA service every day. And even with the significant fiscal pressure we're under, MTA has been focused on providing critical services throughout the state. For example, that's why we're proposing the budget includes an additional 109 pins for MTA and 10 apprenticeship pins as well. These additional positions will help to improve reliability of MTA riders and prepare the workforce of the future. And it's encouraging to see the increase in ridership throughout MTA's core service, including over 60 million rides in 2023. We're also moving forward with important projects that were mentioned. The Red Line obviously is one of the big ones where we're doing everything we can to move that as quickly as we can through the rather detailed federal process to get that moving. And then also the Purple Line is the other big one, obviously in Prince George, Montgomery County. We are 65% done on that project, which is very good. As was mentioned, there is a financial implication with getting that one part of the project behind us, which is the utility work that MTA had taken on several years ago, and that now is behind us, and that is what drove the additional costs and schedule implications. So with that, I'll turn it over to Holly to run through the remainder of the presentation.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chair Elfrith and members of the committee. For the record, I'm Holly Arnold, Administrator of the Maryland Transit Administration. As always, I would like to thank Carrie Cook for her excellent review. She's incredibly helpful and professional. So as was mentioned, MTA is facing the same fiscal cliff that is impacting transit agencies across the country. However, thanks to the additional aid from Governor Moore, the impact to MTA's FY25 operating budget was reduced from 98 million to 36 million, and 15 million was restored in the FY25 capital budget. That funding includes 26 million to fully restore the operating grants to our locally operated transit systems and to adjust that funding beginning in FY25 so that our allocation distributions are more equitable and responsive to changes in local jurisdictions' investments in transit service. 8 million in those funds will continue to support our Mark Brunswick line service to West Virginia while allowing us to advance expansion of midday service subject to CSX agreement and BPW approval. 28 million is also going towards our commuter bus service. While commuter bus hasn't reached the pre-pandemic levels, we do understand the importance of this service to connecting riders to job centers, addressing the climate crisis by reducing carbon emissions, and to our roadways by reducing congestion and promoting safer and healthier streets for the region. Last month, we announced our proposed adjustments to commuter bus. The changes focus on maintaining access across all regions where commuter bus currently operates. We used ridership data, and then we considered equity and both existing and potential access when creating that service plan. I encourage riders to go to our website for full details on the proposed plan. We welcome them to submit a written comment, and they can see the full public hearing schedule where they can participate either virtually or in person at 5 hearings. So in addition to the operating adjustments, there was a necessity to implement reductions to the capital budget, but MDOT will continue to prioritize all federal discretionary grant matches remain fully funded to keep our projects moving forward. So while not without some challenges, I would like to take a moment to highlight some of the successes that MTA has had over the past year. Last year, ridership across all of our transit modes increased by over 14% as we provided more than 60 million rides to residents and visitors throughout the region. Governor Moore relaunched the Red Line, a much-needed east-west transit project in the Baltimore region. The Red Line team has held multiple rounds of public outreach already, and the project has strong community support. In Montgomery and Prince George's counties, constructions continued on the Purple Line, and that project now sits at over 65% complete. Last summer, we did provide interim relief to the contractor due to delays in completing the work MTA took on when the prior design builder left the project. We noted at that time that delays were continuing and a final resolution would need to occur upon completion of the MTA work. So as the secretary mentioned, MTA has now completed our scope of work for the utility relocations as of October and the Glen Ridge Operations and Maintenance Facility as of this past December. So we've been working with our contractor, PLTP, and we have a proposed P3 modification that we're asking for Board of Public Works approval on in mid-March. This change will adjust the project opening date from spring of 2027 to winter of 2027 and provide additional compensation of up to $425 million to the concessionaire. It does also tie payments to major project milestones, such as the delivery of the first light rail vehicles here to Maryland and completion of major project work on the University of Maryland campus. The Purple Line team is going to continue to work closely with the community to deliver this critical project. On the Mark side, we signed agreements with Delaware and Virginia to expand service and further improve regional connectivity. We also partnered with Amtrak on a number of critical projects throughout the Northeast Corridor, including the Frederick Douglass Tunnel, the Susquehanna River Bridge, the Bush and Gunpowder River Bridges, and we were successful in bringing more than $6 billion in Federal Railroad Administration grant awards to Maryland. We've been investing in updating our existing systems, and the first of our new Metro rail cars arrived on site in Baltimore and remains on schedule to go into service in 2025. And we've begun the work on replacing our existing light rail fleet with modern, accessible vehicles, which will guide us into the future. As Carrie mentioned, we were awarded $213 million from the Federal Transit Administration Rail Vehicle Replacement Program for this program. And I want to brag for a minute, that is the second largest award in the program history. On the administrative side of the house, we're really focused on reducing our open positions, and we ended 2023 with a vacancy rate of 5.2%. That includes a reduction in our operator vacancies by more than 40%, which is critical to our efforts to increase the reliability. Sitting here today, our vacancy rate has continued to reduce. We're now overall at 4.6%, and operator vacancies are down to 1.4%. So in real numbers, that's 18. Like, we have very few vacancies right now. We've really been focused on hiring. So finally, throughout all of this, we are remaining focused on our riders and the communities that we serve. So we've established the Office of Customer Experience. We've been celebrating with our communities at Pride, at the Veterans Day Parade, at AFRIAM, and numerous other events throughout the region. It's been a busy year for MTA, and one filled with truly meaningful work. Transit really is critical to the long-term economic success of the region. It's key to our efforts to reduce emissions and tackle climate change. And while the cost for individual car ownership continues to grow, transit ensures that we have equitable access for everyone. So I want to thank the entire team for their outstanding work. It does truly matter. So now turning to the DLS analysis. So in the first issue, we were asked to discuss how the Purple Line contract modifications may impact other projects and priorities. As I mentioned, the Purple Line is a critical east-west connector across Montgomery and Prince George's counties. It's going to improve travel time. It's going to provide access to hundreds of thousands of Marylanders. So as I previously mentioned, we are seeking approval of a contract modification in mid-March. We will be updating the draft CTP this fall, the same way we do with any other project, and so including the full cost in that draft CTP. We'll strive to continue a focus on funding safety critical and state of good repair projects as we adjust the budget to accommodate the Purple Line. You also requested that I comment on current funding levels not meeting figures cited in the CNI report. So I do want to note that thanks to Governor Moore, the budget is sufficient to meet the levels noted in the Transit Safety and Investment Act. The CNI really kind of stands at a point in time. And so we're in the process now of updating it for the 2025 update. We have to do it every 3 years. We think it'll probably show higher needs likely to inflation and having a better handle on the full cost of transitioning to zero emission buses. Right now, the main focus is actually on project delivery. We want to ensure that as we get the dollars coming in, that we're able to spend them and spend them responsibly. So we're really focused on how we can improve that process. We've added pins to our procurement department. We brought in consultants to support to help us to identify process and procedure changes that will allow us to increase our spending. We've also created a project management oversight department that helps us to better bundle our projects, schedule our projects, and plan for them so that we can minimize rider disruptions as we are continuing to ensure that our system is in a state of good repair. So next, you asked me to describe progress on the implementation of the Department of Justice recommendations. So first, we fully recognize the critical service that mobility provides to our riders. We are undertaking an internal study of mobility now to better understand existing and future needs so that we can plan for the next 10 years of what mobility looks like at the agency. We're going to be producing a 10-year projection on ridership and staffing levels, as well as determining system improvements and any necessary vehicle replacements that we need to take. We are still in active negotiations with DOJ, so I can't get into details here, but just note that we are fully committed to continuous improvements in our paratransit system. And so finally, we were asked to discuss the Youth Transit Council and the Office of Customer Experience. So I do want to correct one thing that you said, Carrie. So actually, by federal law, we are not allowed to provide school service. The Maryland law requires that we provide supplemental service free of charge to students. But per federal law, it has to be open to everyone so that anyone can ride those buses. So I just want to make sure I'm on the record with that. So if anyone from the feds is listening, we are not breaking the law. That said, it is an important part of the role.
That's why I whispered to her. I don't want to go there.
Providing access to students. About 30,000 school students do ride our system every single day. And so that's why it's important that we've kicked off the Youth Transit Council this year. So we have selected 20 members for the inaugural class. They've held their first virtual meeting. We're scheduling the first in-person meeting later this spring, and I do look forward to working with them. The voices will help us to better identify opportunities to improve service for young people. Regarding the Office of Customer Experience, we created that last fall. We recently hired our first ever rider experience director. And the team's going to be engaging with riders throughout the system. We're going to be doing focus groups, surveys, ride-alongs. Governor Moore does say, we need to be data-driven and heart-led. And that's what this office is going to help us do. We're going to use the stories collected by that team and tie it to our data to make better and more rider-focused decisions. So with all that said, thank you for the time, and I'll turn it back to the secretary.
Be glad to take any questions you have.
Thank you very much. And again, congratulations on the federal funding. We push everybody in this room to be as competitive as possible. And huge relief to hear that you were successful with that. I would make one suggestion for your new Youth Transit Council, which I think is a great initiative. I would just keep Senator McCray in the loop on that one, considering it really does impact his district and his children who utilize that system for school. Okay.
Absolutely.
Senator Rosepep, then Senator Jackson.
Thank you. A couple of questions. One is, it goes to the chart in the analysis on page 5 of ridership. And I can't quite keep my colors straight here, but I'm not colorblind. But it looks to me as though light rail ridership has almost come back to pre-pandemic levels. Does that make sense?
I think we're close to 85% as of today on light rail ridership.
Okay. And whereas Mark, if I got the colors right, is way, way below that. And Metro is way, way below that. And commuter bus is way, way below that. And is that fundamentally because light rail is the only one that really wasn't commuter driven?
So I want to note, so our Metro ridership is closer. I think it's, if I remember correctly, between 60 and 70% of where we were previously. I think it's getting lost a little bit here in the chart.
It's at 400 and it was at 700 in October of.
So
19.
think about the 60% of where we were previously.
Yeah.
So on let me start with Mark and commuter bus. So those are primarily commuter driven, mostly with the federal workforce. Typically 65% of our riders are federal employees. And so as they have been kind of slowly coming back to work full,
60% of which riders?
Of the Mark and commuter bus riders.
Mark and commuter bus, okay, those two.
Yep. And, they're coming back into the office a couple days a week. But the issue is, we have to provide the service 5 days a week. And so that is really kind of the struggle that we're having. It's similar to what's happening down Washington Metro. MTA Metro, I do want to note there the ridership numbers. We learned recently that the way that we were kind of capturing the ridership was as folks were exiting through the fare gates, our fare gates were not recording it appropriately. So we've recently changed how we've been calculating it with actual manual counts. We have people there who are counting those. So I want to caution, I still don't know that we have a good story on what's going on with Metro ridership because I don't think we have a good understanding yet of how many folks are still using it. So that is something we're looking at over the next years to better improve how we're counting our Metro ridership.
Gotcha. Well, and I have a particular interest in Mark because Camden runs through a lot of my district and the Penn line serves my district, but doesn't run through it anymore. And I think the future of Mark is like a big issue. And so I know you're thinking about it. I know it relates to all the ideas that Corman and other people are doing in terms of connecting to Virginia and all that sort of stuff. But I just, sort of over the next year, I'd love to, if there's thinking about kind of long-term Mark, I think that's something that I'd like to learn more about. So that was one. Second one was, you say you've done a great job recruiting drivers, I think?
We've been very focused on bus operators.
Bus operator, yeah. So how'd you do it?
Number one, I think we raised the wages was a big piece of that.
Okay.
We made an agreement, I asked the secretary for permission and he said we could. So we made a side agreement with the union this past June, where we basically decreased the time it takes to get to top rate. So instead of 5 years, it takes 3. And so now you're starting at that year 3 rate. So it's just under $26 an hour. So for a position where you don't have to have a high school degree, it's a very competitive wage, where I think before we were right around where Amazon was. Amazon, you can get paid same day. There's all those types of things. And so now we're enticing people into a career versus before where it was not quite there.
And what about, so that's money. And that's big, that's the big deal. Is that 70% of the reason you did it? You were able to succeed, or was it 50%?
I don't know that, and
What do you
if
think?
you have any data on that, but the other thing that we've tried to do, if you've seen any of our advertisement, is really be part of the department and the career opportunities that the department of our size does. And we've attracted a little, we're finding that out as we meet with our new employees. That's working very well. And we've seen the numbers jump up across all modes. And I think it's reflected in the MTA as well.
Great. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Secretary, the question about the security contract, did you answer that's your dollars or grant dollars you'll be seeking going forward?
I believe it's our dollars.
Yes,
It's
your
all our
dollars
dollars.
going
Yeah.
forward. Okay. They definitely like to stay in touch with you on that matter and the numbers that you're talking about. Obviously, security is important. It's very obvious, but again, we want to help you. You have a budget that we're completely your partners on, and if we can help in any way. Secondly, I like the fact that the Southern Maryland Rapid Transit is still part of your portfolio going forth. I know for those of us on the southern part of the state, you have 70,000 plus people come from Charles, St. Mary's, and Calvert County and come right up through French Georges to either go to the Branch Avenue or Naylor Road metro stations or continue to their place. And definitely want to continue to partner with you on that. I think there were some over the last few years or last 10 years or so, where we had overpass at Coventry Way or Woodyard Road, and then we got down to Brandywine or between Brandywine Road. We did not do an overpass at Brandywine. But we have just before you get there, there's a turnabout or I'm not sure what you call that. You go up the ramp and you turn around. It's a little challenging for us down there. And on the state highway side, we'll have conversations about that, and we are in touch with your folks. But we do appreciate understanding the need there. And lastly, with with your commuter buses, we talked before. The flexibility of the buses, now that we are making sure that we have that service for this fiscal year, the flexibility as the federal government is getting folks back to work, and they get home if they have to. And that's something that we want to make sure we stay in touch with you about going forward as well. So thank you.
It will do, Senator.
Thank you, Senator. That was my only question based on in current budget, rolling back some funding, fiscal 25, and then anticipated fiscal 26 for commuter buses is going to continue to be difficult. We have been approached, I think, everybody on the subcommittee by some of the companies about greater flexibility when it comes to relaxing some of the penalties as it relates to late arrivals, early departures, and then age of buses. It would perhaps be fair for us to consider some flexibility.
Yeah, so I will note, I actually have a meeting, I think next week with the commuter bus contractors. We have a menu of things that we want to take a look at from the bonding levels that we're requiring, the buses. I struggle a little bit with reducing the late departures because that has a real impact on our riders. But I think there's some other ways in the contracts where we can and will provide relief to the contractors to recognize that this puts them in a little bit of a tougher position.
The sooner you can have that meeting, the better. I don't like for the subcommittee to be put between a rock and a hard place when I think it's best for you to negotiate those changes.
Yep, like I said, next week, and we'll be happy to report back after that.
Early week, midweek, late week.
I believe it's Thursday. I could check my calendar if you would like.
Make it.
Would you like me to forward you the invite?
I wish I could be there, but
March 7th at 1 p.m. I'm meeting with the Commuter Bus Coalition. If I can need to move it earlier, I can try, but we've got a tough schedule.
If I might.
Senator.
Thank you for saying that, because the department is meeting with Prince George's delegation on Monday. And so be ready for that. And but glad to know that about that particular meeting. And thank you for the meeting as well. So
If possible,
if possible.
I would recommend moving it up a little bit. Again, I don't think the subcommittee wants to tell you what to do. So best resolve it.
I hear that feedback, so we will do what we can.
Thank you. Senator Rosepet.
Yeah, I wanted to go back to Mark for a minute. Before the pandemic, I was noticing, and other people were noticing too, a material number of people using Lyft and Uber to get to Mark. And these issues of parking lots at stations and all that sort of stuff. Is there any data or any analysis or any research on last mile now that we have these flexible driving services?
I mean, yes, we've been continuing to engage with the industry, and I'm happy to share, what we see there. We're also currently doing an origin and destination survey for all of our different modes. So we should have a report out on that later this year.
Great.
That I'm happy to share. So it does kind of get into like, how did you get to the station? Did you take Uber and Lyft? Did you walk? Did you take transit? And so we'll have a better sense of data on all of our modes, which will be incredibly helpful as we continue to make decisions.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel anecdotally that where COVID and working at home was a game changer, which I think is here to stay to a greater or lesser extent. I think flexible driving is a game changer too, that's here to stay. And it just seems to me that one is an opportunity for transit to change the mix. So I'd be interested as time goes forward and kind of what you're learning, what you're seeing, and how we can promote that.
Yeah, I mean, I know when I was at Metro, we were trying to work with them very closely. At that time, they were very tight-lipped about what some of their data, and they didn't share that as much. Maybe it's changed a little bit now, as the world has moved past the pandemic. But I know historically we were trying to be pretty aggressive in that area. Like, where were there opportunities for us? Because at the end of the day, may even save us a bus operating cost.
Oh, yeah.
Right? And so that was where I was coming from.
Gotcha.
And I know Holly's thinking the same way, but I just don't know where they are now within their data sharing, because that you really need that to really understand.
Right.
Yeah,
what's happening in the
one
market
thing,
there.
so I'd encourage you to pursue it, but
Yep.
one thing I'd also think about maybe you're doing is joint marketing.
Mhm.
Because I think a lot of people don't think about it. It's like, I think I've told you the story, told everybody the story that when we added service on the MARC line between College Park and Camden Yards, and I talked to the president of the University of Maryland, Baltimore, and the University of Maryland, neither of them knew there was a train between Camden Yards and College Park. And so lots of people, I don't think, really understand that it could cost you, X dollars to get to the station that's much more convenient for you than, anyway, just a thought. Thanks.
They do know they have light rail now, though. At the campus.
Actually, they know it's coming.
Yeah.
Senator's been coming since I served on the Board of Regents back in a long time ago, and probably since you were on the Board of Regents, it's been coming.
Have you been out there lately?
Yeah,
Campus Drive?
yes.
You can see
The fences are-
tracks,
yeah.
the track down one side.
Okay.
You
Okay.
really do see it.
Seeing no further questions, Ms. Arnold and Mr. Secretary, if you could stay, we have 3 witnesses. I just want to make sure you hear their feedback as well.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to call John Laria and Brian O'Malley.
Is it all right if I go first?
Sure.
Okay, thanks, Madam Chair and committee members. I want to join in congratulating on the great news about the federal grant, the growth in ridership recovery, and the hiring. I'm Brian O'Malley with the Central Maryland Transportation Alliance. I also want to remind us about November 2021, President Biden signed into law the bipartisan infrastructure law, which sent unprecedented amounts of funding to states for transportation. It also left it up to states. It gave them a lot of leeway and flexibility in how they spend those funds. And 5 months later, Governor Hogan signed into law the Climate Solutions Now Act, which established that Maryland will achieve a 60% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by 2031 compared to 2006 levels. And as we all know, the #1 source of greenhouse gas emissions in Maryland and in the country is the transportation sector. And so how are we doing? We've been spending all this federal money coming under the bipartisan infrastructure law. These budgets that are before you are where the rubber meets the road on that. There was an article in the Guardian yesterday, newspaper. The headline was, U.S. spends billions on roads rather than public transport in climate time bomb. New analysis finds money from Biden's $1.2 trillion infrastructure bill has overwhelmingly been spent on widening highways for cars, roads, and more roads. The U.S. is continuing to spend billions of dollars on expanding enormous highways rather than fund public transport, only further accelerating the dominance of cars at the expense, critics say, of communities and the climate. Moreover, in Transportation for America's findings, which was the group behind that article, Maryland is not an exception. There are a few states that are net reducing the greenhouse gas emissions, but unfortunately Maryland is not one of them. So by 2040, based on how we're spending that federal funding, we will be increasing emissions, which is out of line with that law. And so it's important that we find ways to increase the funding for these transportation needs that are before you with the Maryland Transit Administration's budget, the capital needs, matching the federal grant for light rail car replacement, funding the red line, et cetera. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Elfrith, members of the subcommittee. I'm John Laria. I'm Chair of the Baltimore Regional Transit Commission. I'm also a member of the Train Commission. I'm sure you're familiar with its work as well. And I'm testifying today in my role as Chair of the BRTC. Is essentially it's a volunteer job, if you will. I'm by day a lawyer at Ballard's Bar in Baltimore. As you know, the BRTC was created by the General Assembly last year with the mission to engage state and local partners in pursuit of an ambitious vision of oversight and advocacy for the region's transit system. Until the BRTC, we were really the only major system in the country that had no oversight board. We set out really two goals, the twin goals of accountability and advocacy. And we'll take up accountability with MTA in due course, and we're working on that. But today is really about advocacy before you for the benefit of MTA in the system. We had our first meeting on February 2nd, and we have an obligation to take up a review of MTA's budget, which we began. I am very encouraged that the administration has prioritized transit in the proposed CTP, in that there are more funds available across the 6-year program than there were in last year's 6-year program. But that is really not the story. The story is that there is intense competition, if not conflict, between improving and expanding the system and doing what's necessary to keep things running functionally and safely. In short, there's just not enough money. So I'm glad I'm here today before the appropriators. Many stakeholders and projects vie for resources, and balancing these priorities and allocating funds equitably is a challenge. Transit agencies across the country, whether it's MTA or Armada, are facing a fiscal cliff, as everybody here knows, especially with the decline of federal funds for operating assistance. But a couple of things. I would note that MDOT's 6-year financial forecast includes funding to address WMATA's operating budget shortfall. $1.1 billion over the published CTP in a contingency on top of its operating budget. I am not here to criticize WMATA. WMATA needs and deserves our support, but we're just not seeing a similar commitment to MTA. May I take another minute? I promise. It's also important to note that MTA's proposed budget includes the Purple Line, which, for those not paying attention, is not in Baltimore. And the Purple Line cost increases comprise a significant portion of the total additions to MTA's capital budget in the CTP. But MTA has demonstrated in its capital needs assessment $512 million a year, and those are enormous needs, particularly in MTA's core service area in Baltimore. In short, and in conclusion, inadequate resources really prevent us from achieving the robust and efficient transportation system that we deserve, that Baltimore deserves, and by extension that the state of Maryland deserves. There's just not enough revenue to keep the existing system in a state of good repair, let alone the resources to expand or improve it. So I truly hope that we can come together around a solution that equitably addresses immediate needs and also creates a long-term sustainable model. On behalf of the RTC, I thank you very much. I hope you'll be seeing more of me as we get up and running, but I appreciate very much the opportunity to come and appear before you today. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you both. And Mr. Laria, I thought you were supposed to be retired and you're volunteering all over the place.
Well, that is a conversation, but thank you.
Appreciate you being here.
Of course, happy to be here,
Okay.
Madam Chair.
Okay, next final witness for this budget is Mr. Nick Henninger Ayub. Am I pronouncing that correctly?
You got close.
Okay.
Henninger Ayub. Yes, so Madam Chair and esteemed senators, my name is Nick Henninger Ayub. I'm Director of Policy and Research for the Greater Baltimore Committee, and I'm on the Train Commission as well as Mr. Laria. So on behalf of the Greater Baltimore Committee and the Greater Washington Partnership, co-leads of the Baltimore Transit Future Coalition, I'm here to encourage increased investment in transit service in the Baltimore region as you consider the FY25 budget of the MTA. Baltimore's transit system is an undersized and underfunded system. It struggles to compete with our peer cities for talent and for economic growth. The root of the challenge is a lack of understanding both of the economic value of quality transit and of the untapped potential of Baltimore City and its surrounding region. The current MTA capital and operating budgets, despite the governor's rainy day funds, will continue historical patterns. In addition to restoring MTA's capital and operating funding, we must lay the groundwork for the interim period and the 2025 legislative session, during which we can seek to identify new revenue generating mechanisms and pair those with a multi-billion-dollar transit expansion plan. This expansion plan would include construction of projects like the Red Line and the North-South Line, which will support significant equitable transit-oriented development and other transformative economic impacts. Within this broader context, the Baltimore Transit Future Coalition is supportive of thoughtful, measured approaches to raising new revenues in this session. It's supportive of continued support from this assembly for the work of the Train Commission and the BRTC, with the expectation of implementation of their future recommendations. And finally, we are supportive of the reallocation of funds where appropriate in the current MDOT budgets to MTA to reduce out-year cuts that harm our region. Thank you for your efforts to ensure that Baltimore's transportation system is more competitive with those peer regions that are leveraging transit to power their economic future. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions for this witness? Thank you for being here. With that, we are concluded for MTA, and we next have State Highway Administration. Thank you, Stephen.
Okay, you should have a document in front of you, State Highway Administration. The fiscal 2025 allowance on the operating side increases by $700,000 or just 0.2%. Looking at the managing for results measures, which begin on page 5. The first measure was safety and security. We covered this in the overview. This is the same data, so we'll kind of skip that. Looking at page 6, exhibit 2 shows congestion measure. This is a new measure that way of looking at it that started to be reported this year. And the exhibit shows the bars are annual person hours of delay, and the black line is the maximum delay goal. So you can see that while that delay goal was met during the pandemic, where traffic was down, delay has been increasing and creeping back up towards those pre-pandemic levels. The lighter line is the percentage of unreliable travel time, and again that improved greatly during the pandemic, but has been creeping back up. And although between 2022 and 2023, that stayed level. Looking at the third measure on page 7, exhibit 3, this shows the percentage of bridges in the state highway network with one or more components rated as poor or worse. And you can see that over this 10-year period, Maryland has steadily improved on this measure. And in fact, Maryland's performance on this measure is better than most other states. Looking at page 8, exhibit 4, another system preservation measure looks at highway maintenance condition. There's a goal to improve or maintain at least 85% of the highway network in an overall preferred maintenance condition. And since 2014 through 2023, State Highways Administration has met this goal 6 times, including the last 2 years over this period. Turning now to look at the fiscal 2025 budget, page 9, exhibit 5 shows the overview of spending. And this pie chart kind of shows that, SHA relies heavily on its own personnel to achieve its responsibilities in terms of maintenance and service on state roads, and it also relies on a lot of contractors through contractual services. The pie chart shows that there's a slightly heavier balance in 2025, $35 million more through its own personnel than through contractual services. Exhibit 6 is the governor's proposed budget change. As I indicated at the beginning, the state highway operating budget increases by $717,000. So a very almost flat funding from the current year. Personnel expenses increased by just over $10 million, and that's offset by operation decreases about totaling 9.3 million. The greatest part of that, you'll see on the top of page 11, is a decrease in winter maintenance expenses. The department, following instructions through budget language adopted by the General Assembly, now budgets the winter maintenance expenses at the 5-year average of the last 5 years, ending with the most actual recent actual. And the relatively mild winters the last couple of years has brought that number down. Exhibit 7 shows the cost containment for SHA as part of the CTP balancing, $22.3 million, 22.4 ongoing. And this represents a lot of items that they had committed to following through on improving service, things like the litter pickup and road maintenance, various parts that because of the cost containment, they are having to defer. The personnel chart is on the top of page, or the middle of page 12. SHA gained 1 position in the PAYGO budget. During this is an interagency transfer of a position. It's not an actual new creation of a position. On January 1st of this year, the department had 186 vacant positions for a 6.3% vacancy rate. In the 2025 allowance, they have a budgeted turnover rate of 6%. So they do have the ability between those two numbers to hire about 9 more positions for the full year and still meet vacancy. Of course, there's lots of churn during the year that will affect those numbers. The PAYGO capital project or description begins on page 13, with the first exhibit on page 14 shows the highway user grant mandated capital grants for the fiscal 2023 actual through 2025. As I'm sure you recall, in December, the department had announced that there would be part of the cuts would be a highway user cuts. That governors through that $150 million from the dedicated purpose for 2025 did fully fund highway users, so there is no reduction. And as you can see in Exhibit 8, the 2025 allowance increases by $61 million. That's mostly attributable to the fact that the local share does increase between 24 and 25 from 15.6% to 18%. The distribution of the 2025 allowance is shown in Exhibit 9 on pages 14 and 15. And I will note that there is, even with 25 being no cut, the BRFA as introduced does still contain provisions that the administration proposes to maintain 26 and 27 at 15.6%, whereas current law would have that funded at 20%. So that represents about $100 million reduction in the highway user local share under the administration's plan. As we get to the recommended action section, the LS has actually made a recommendation to further reduce that, at least to put it on the table for helping to balance the needs of the capital plan, and we'll discuss that in a moment. Exhibit 16 on, Exhibit 10 on page 16 shows a list of discretionary grant applications that State Highway has submitted but is awaiting decisions on awards. In June of 2023, the administration did receive nearly $12 million discretionary grant through the Federal Advanced Transportation Technologies and Innovative Mobility Deployment Program, which will be used to install new technology aimed at improving safety and reducing congestion on US 50 on the Eastern Shore. The 2025 capital, 6-year funding is shown on Exhibit 11, page 17, by investment category. You can see that system preservation makes up the largest chunk of the 6-year program, with safety, security, and then expansion efficiency being the next two categories. Exhibit 12 on page 18 shows that more than 3/4 of the allowance is for projects in the minors program. And exhibit 13 on page 19 shows the breakout of the minors program by investment categories. And again, you can see that system preservation, is the largest category. So there's a lot of emphasis on maintaining what we already have. And the list of projects in the minors program shown on exhibit 14, starting on page 19 and continuing on page 20. Exhibit 15 on page 21 shows the cash flow changes between the 2024 budget is introduced last session and the current year working appropriation. That decreases by $104 million. And then between the the working appropriation and the allowance, there is a $21.5 million increase. Page 6, exhibit 16, which is a large exhibit, goes 10 pages, shows a list of select SHA capital projects in the CTP. In order to make the list, it had to have at least $1 million in the fiscal 2025 allowance, or $5 million or more in spending over the 6-year program. And this, again, just gives you an idea. It has it by jurisdiction, so you can look at your own county's kind of major projects that make that list. Turning then to page 31 shows the first year funding for SHA. In fiscal 2025, $41.6 million of their 2025 allowance is first year funding for design or construction. So nearly 97% of it is kind of ongoing spending for projects currently underway. The first year funding projects are shown in exhibit 18 on page 32. The major changes or significant changes to the prior year's CTP exhibit is exhibit 19 on pages 33 and 34. This shows some new projects added to the construction program. These are largely reflected of the new federal funding programs that come in with the PROTECT program, the NEVI program, which is the electric vehicle charging program. And then a couple other programs show in. The biggest change in the program compared to last year are the projects you see in italics, starting on the bottom of that exhibit on page 33 and going to the next page. And these were the projects that were, in order to help balance the budget, were removed from the construction program, and the dollar amounts you see in the total cost program now represent only the development and evaluation work that will go on for these projects until a time where there's sufficient funding to move them back into the construction, at which point the construction funding would then show up in the 6-year program. The discussion of the issues begin on page 35. Issue number 1 is not specific to SHA, but due to the timing, it was the last analysis that I was working on that I could raise this, and I thought you'd be interested. And that is the fact that the MDOT partnered with the Eastern Transportation Coalition to conduct a pilot on mileage-based user fees, or MBUFs. That's one name that people use. You've probably heard, vehicle miles traveled, VMT thing. So various names for the same concept, but it is studying methods of maintaining that user pay system by going to a mileage-based fee. This pilot project that they entered into is a very small project and a very short term, but it's trying to evaluate whether this may become a good alternative to move towards to replace the motor fuel tax, which, as you've heard multiple times this session, is kind of topping out in terms of its revenue generation ability and is likely to start declining in the future. So this pilot project is a simulated project, meaning there's no funds actually transferred, but it will simulate people reporting their travel through they have 4 means of participating. 3 of them involve GPS systems, a mobile app, in-vehicle telematics for newer vehicles, or plugging into the onboard diagnostic plug that you may have used for your vehicle emissions if you've done that. There's also one option that does not use GPS, using an app that would do a photo capture of the odometer. And the idea is they will capture the driving habits and show a report that would show how many miles you drove in Maryland, surrounding jurisdictions that are also participating with simulated amounts per mile. You would have a list of how much you would owe under that system, and any credits against the fuel tax that were paid would be simulated as well. And we've asked MDOT to discuss what it hopes to achieve through this and what the next steps for moving forward on this idea would be. The second issue, beginning on the bottom of page 35, talks about the managed lane projects. This is the American Legion Bridge and the toll lanes. As you recall, last year, the public partnership was disbanded as the private partner left the project according to terms of the agreement. And since that time, the project is proceeding in terms of it's in the CTP and the development option. The department is seeking ways of funding that large project. One of the things that changes to the project scope is under the P3, the first phase 1 south had intended to go from just south of the American Legion Bridge across and up 270 to the I-370, I-270 interchange. That scope has now been pared back to the current project that they're seeking federal funding for, would stop basically at the I-270 spur on 495. That $4 billion plus project, the department has applied for several grants through federal programs to help fund that. They have heard back on one of their big grant applications for $2.4 billion that they were denied that. They still have a $2.2 billion grant application in for that project through the Federal Bridge Investment Program. And we've just asked MDOT to discuss the implications for this project should it be unsuccessful in obtaining, federal discretionary funds. Although I will point out that, those applications are an annual cycle, and I'm sure they will be pursuing further grant opportunities in the future as well. And then the final recommendation, or the issue, deals with the recommendation I mentioned on the highway user, and we just put this exhibit 20 in to show what the implications are. And I'll just kind of some background as to why DLS is putting this on the table. Back in 2018, General Assembly did pass legislation which provided a 5-year enhancement of the highway user rates for the locals. But as you can see in the top section of exhibit 20, in fiscal 2025, the intention at that point was to return to the 9.6% level for local highway users. Then in 2022, the General Assembly enacted further legislation modifying the enhancement and setting a new base rate at 15.6%. So at that point, the idea was it would not go back to 9.6, and there would still be a couple years of even further enhancements getting up, as I said, for fiscal 26 and 7 to 20%. And then going in 2028 and beyond would be the new level of 15.6%. DLS just notes that kind of these enhancements were made at a time when it looked like this was affordable and that the state could continue to meet its obligations in its capital program. However, the discussion has changed over the last year with the draft CTP coming out, the need to pare back the cuts that were made on the state program. There are a lot of proposals out there for maybe revenue generations, and that could maybe obviate the need to do some kind of adjustment on the local highway user side. But if you can't get sufficient revenue, on the revenue side, cuts to all kinds of programs need to be considered, not just the state side, and that gives you an opportunity to take that into consideration. With that, the recommendations are on page 39. The operating recommendation is concur with the governor's budget. The PAYGO recommendation relates to the highway user, would be a contingent reduction based on passage of the BRFA that sets the rates, at the levels discussed. And for fiscal 2025, that would be a reduction to the local side of nearly $185 million. And I would just note that the reason this helps the state is the highway user is now part of the capital program. And so the capital pie gets split up between the locals and the state. So whatever, if the local share gets smaller, the state share gets bigger. Conversely, you know, anytime you increase the local share, you're decreasing the state share. So that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Stephen. Questions? We would, based on it being a BRF recommendation, the PAGO would be taken up, not by the subcommittee.
My understanding is the full committee will decide, yes, so for your decision process, it'll just be the operating side that you'll make a recommendation on.
Thank you very much. Mr. Secretary.
Again, for the record, Paul Whitfeld, Secretary of Transportation, with me as Will Pines, the State Highway Administrator. And thank you, Stephen, obviously, for the detailed analysis that you've done. The department is committed to building a multimodal transportation system that's safe, reliable, and accessible for all users. And State Highway plays an important role in meeting that commitment as it manages nearly 18,000 lane miles across the state of Maryland. And they are continuing to focus on critical good repair and state of good repair needs, and also the basics of everything that they do every day, everything from litter control to basic maintenance of potholes and what have you. So I'll just quickly go through the one issue that was raised since this was the only opportunity that Steve had to fight at it, which was the pilot mileage-based user program. As you know, as Steve mentioned, with the financial pressures we're under and the future of the gas tax basically not being able to grow into the future, if not actually decline, states across the country are looking at other alternatives, one of them being mileage-based system. So we did join with the Eastern Transportation Coalition, which is basically the I-95 corridor from Florida to New England. There's been a number of these studies done in that area, and we've joined them. So the pilot program just started in February. We have just under 150 participants, and basically we'll see what type of data it generates for us in terms of, again, as Steve mentioned, different alternatives you could use with that information. I happen to have joined it myself. I just put up the app. It shows me some really neat stuff about what I did for the last 2 weeks and how I traveled. It's really interesting. I have a pure electric car, so it's really kind of interesting because it's getting at that core issue as well. So we'll see what happens in May as we start to analyze that data again with these professionals. This also, Federal Highway has a role in this project as well, just so you're aware of that. So anyway, that's that portion of the program. I'll turn it over to Will to go through the rest of the program and the issues.
All right, thank you, Secretary Wiedefeld, and good afternoon, Chair Elfreth and members of the committee. I want to start by echoing the Secretary's gratitude for Steve's analysis and his partnership with SHA. Sadly, this month, we marked the first anniversary of one of the most tragic work zone crashes in Maryland history. 6 lives were lost on March 22nd, 2023 on the Baltimore Beltway. And we've been honored to work alongside the Lieutenant Governor on the Governor Moore's Work Zone Safety Group, and proudly support the Maryland Road Worker Protection Act being considered by the legislature. The safety of our customers, employees, and workers is our top priority at the State Highway Administration, and our goal is to deliver an integrated multimodal transportation system that's safe, reliable, and accessible for all users. We are focused on investing in our system preservation program, as Steve mentioned, and maintaining our existing assets in a state of good repair. In fiscal year 25, we have $945 million budgeted for our system preservation and minor projects program. And last year, SHA made significant investments into vulnerable user safety across the state. We launched our Pedestrian Safety Action Plan, otherwise known as the PSAP plan, which is a data-driven tool that identifies the most critical pedestrian and bicycle needs across the state. We have nearly $100 million of funding allocated in the final CTP for this program. SHA is positioned to move forward with design on segments along 5 corridors for that program, and that includes Maryland 650 in Montgomery and Prince George's counties, Maryland 410, also in Prince George's County, Maryland 2 in Anne Arundel County, Maryland 150 in Baltimore County, and US 1 in Howard County. We also published the Vulnerable Road User Safety Assessment, which identifies high-risk locations statewide. And we're continuing to work with the Secretary's office to complete an update to Maryland's Complete Streets policy. Since summer of 2023, we have made considerable progress to almost 400 crosswalks at nearly 200 intersections statewide. In November, we also completed the $6.4 million US-1 trolley trail in Hyattsville, which is a key connection in the Anacostia tributary trail system. And although we face significant challenges, we are continuing to work on development and evaluation phases on our majors and moving forward on construction with other critical infrastructure projects across the state. We just completed the $34 million replacement of 3 bridges at Sparrows Point Boulevard and Wharf Road interchange in Baltimore County to promote economic development at Trade Point Atlantic. Construction for the $181 million interchange at Maryland 4 and Suitland Parkway has also started. And we're moving ahead with preliminary engineering work for the interchange at the FBI headquarters. We must leverage every federal dollar made available to us, which includes applying for grants. And SHA is currently preparing a RAISE grant application for Prince George's County's Maryland 210 bike connectivity project. Over the past year, SHA has also had significant successes across the entire organization. We exceeded Governor Moore's vacancy goal of cutting the vacancy rate in half by the end of 2023. In January of 2023, our vacancy rate was 12.1%, and today our vacancy rate is at 5.7%. In 2023, we spent nearly $15 million on litter and debris pickup, and thanks to Governor Moore, we now show in the budget for FY25 litter budget of nearly $17 million. SHA also was approved by the Department of Labor to participate in the apprenticeship program. And so far, we've successfully had 12 students pass into skilled trade functions positions. Now turning to the DLS analysis, SHA is continuing to move forward with exploring funding options for the American Legion Bridge 270 program. As you are aware, MDOT was not awarded the multimodal project discretionary grant for the project. However, the Bridge Investment Program grant application process is still underway. SHA also continues to make progress on due diligence activities and preliminary engineering along the corridor to advance project readiness, which will help best position MDOT to receive grants. The final CTP has $108 million in preliminary engineering and design funded for phase 1 south of the project, which replaces the segment that includes the American Legion Bridge. And ongoing efforts in that preliminary engineering include field work for data collection, updated traffic modeling, early utility coordination, and work to acquire necessary environmental permits. There is also a $50.5 million included to advance the phase 1 north planning study for I-270 corridor north of the Intercounty Connector. And with that, I'll turn things back over to Secretary Wiedefeld, and I'm happy and look forward to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Take any questions you have.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I appreciate your partnership on the Route 5 Moores Road effort. We're with that Royal Farms there, which has kind of thrown everyone for a loop in that part of the county. And again, that's right along that same corridor where we're talking about the Southern Maryland Rapid Transit. And that's kind of been a bear for us. We're working with your engineers down there, Campbellides and I believe Gunn and those folks, and so we're looking to circle back with that community. So we do look forward to that. Secondly, it's great to hear that you have a lot of money for the through Operation Clean Sweep, Mr. Secretary. Thank God we've had some mild winters, and I will say, we are the bean counters, we're the budget folks, and we have to do our job. And so we will say this: we do appreciate the effort, the doubling up of trash pickup and the cuttings of the grass. That made a huge difference, and it was visible. And as you know, for some of us who are in the southern Maryland area of the state, there are a lot of numbered roads down there which belong to you. And we can certainly use that, and continue to use that service. So lastly, I'll say, we had a conversation the last couple of times we met regarding a piece of legislation dealing with human trafficking. Thank you all for your input. We believe that the amendments that you sent over should help us continue to move that. And it's very vital to us in the entire public safety community that we continue to walk that awareness mode down. So thank you for your response. So it means a lot to us. So thank you, Chair.
I'll echo Senator Jackson's comments. I appreciate both of you being available to us, and not just the roadshow, Mr. Secretary, but also sitting down with the delegations individually and hearing our concerns throughout the interim. We greatly appreciate it. Also echo for the rural parts of my district and Senator Jackson's district, greatly appreciate particularly tree trimming for our farming community who have to commute via tractor between farms, and appreciate your due diligence there. Two questions, and I think you've heard from me on these two before, but I just want to again highlight the contractual services. I appreciate that why we're spending 130 million, 36% of your budget on that. Is there any opportunity for cost savings if you were to bring those contractual services somewhat, perhaps not 100%, but more in-house?
You want me to take it?
Well, I can talk at a high level from the department. It's industry across the department, right? So it's not just a state highway. There are some opportunities. Some of it makes sense just given the peaks and valleys that we have. So it does make some sense in that case. So a good example, for instance, at the airport, it makes sense to have a crew that does the roadway, but to make sure the airfield is controlled by us, so you have that resource. So it varies by mode, to be frank. So we will continue to look at that because it does make a lot of sense where we can to do that. So we will continue to do that.
So just dovetailing on that, certain things like winter maintenance in particular, there's a lot of ebbs and flows years to year and having contractual services really helps us to balance out and level off things, as the secretary mentioned.
Is the majority of folks we see out there tree trimming or picking up trash, majority are contractors, or are they in-house?
That really depends on the region. We have certain areas like our District 6 forces are pretty in-house. Some of the metro areas, just the volume that
for Western Maryland.
Yeah.
Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Some of our metro areas, for example, litter pickup as an example is something that we really have to contract out quite a bit.
Okay. If you could look at whether bringing any more in-house would be particularly efficient, we appreciate that. I don't think we need language on it, but I trust that you'll take that recommendation seriously. And then lastly, the quality of life stuff, as I just mentioned, on page 11, Exhibit 7, the cost containment action, appreciate across the board, you had to roll back some of your priorities. What is this going to look like in terms of services to our constituents?
It's challenging. We certainly, one of the key actions that we're trying to do with this cost containment is try to shift to leverage as much federal money as possible. There's certain, let's take drainage issues as an example. We're making some investment in our asset management program in order to try to recover more of those work activities with federal dollars. So that we're trying to offset the impact to the extent that we can. But you've certainly seen some of the drainage challenges in Anne Arundel County. And so those things may pop up more, but we'll be poised to respond to them, but it kind of positions us to be a little bit more reactionary than what we would have liked to.
So kind of holding the line as opposed to getting out ahead of some stuff.
Correct.
Okay, we understand. Senator Jackson?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. Just to dovetail on that. So from a contractual standpoint, I know we just talked about trying to bring more inside, but during these tough times, rural Maryland, Marbidco, some of these other organizations that are out here who have environmental scientists that they bring in via grants and working with the school systems. Maybe there's some ways that we can kind of take a look at those. I don't know. We just want to try to help as best we can from the landscaping to the drainage or runoffs. So just a thought. Thank you.
You know, the comments,
Please.
if
Yeah.
any other, first and foremost, I wanted to thank the superintendent because they're partners with us, particularly on the highway system. They do a fantastic job, obviously in enforcement, but unfortunately, they also work very closely with us when we have incidents, and they do a fantastic job. So I just want to thank him and his team. And then I think this is our last hearing in front of me. So just want to thank you. I know we'll be doing in the few weeks ahead of us, but thank you for basically hearing us out on some of the issues and understanding some of the issues and helping to solve some of the issues that we're all trying to best with. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. One final question, because we had DBM in front of us yesterday for the BRFA hearing, but I'm curious if MDOT has feedback on DLS's proposed readjustment of HUR.
I think it's part of the larger discussion that we're having on all these issues. Because as you know, we had proposed something as well. I think it's in that context. So I think that'll play out in the next few weeks as well.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you very much. And we have one witness, if you wouldn't mind staying
Of course.
to listen. Thank you. Ms. Cheryl Court.
Thank you, Chair Alfred, and members of the committee. My name is Cheryl Court. I'm with a nonprofit called Coalition for Smarter Growth. We're the leading organization advocating for walkable, bikeable, inclusive, transit-oriented communities as the most sustainable and equitable way for the Washington, D.C. region to grow and provide opportunities for all. We work extensively in suburban Maryland, focusing on Montgomery and Prince George's County. We acknowledge that Maryland faces daunting transportation and budget and general budget challenges. This means that we cannot continue business as usual, and we need to focus on efficient patterns of growth and development. The current challenge is an opportunity to redirect SHA's investments to ensure we are maintaining our roadways, sidewalks, bike lanes, trails, and using limited funds to ensure the safety, accessibility, and equity of our state highway network. We should ensure that SHA investments are advancing Maryland's approved goals to reduce vehicle miles traveled, greenhouse gas emissions, and achieving Vision Zero. And I just wanted to echo the comments by my colleague, Brian O'Malley, and talk about the need to flex more of the available federal funds that traditionally have gone to roadway capacity expansion can go to investing in fixing it first and expanding transportation choices and safety. I do want to acknowledge a number of ways that SHA has really stepped forward and was mentioned before, the pedestrian action plan. We're very excited about moving forward with this and fixing the top priority corridors that were a part of that announcement. We also want to thank SHA for their enthusiastic support for a complete streets training that they're participating in Prince George's County that we are coordinating. We want to express support also for the Complete Streets policy that the state is putting together. We're very enthusiastic to be a part of that. We thank SHA for its work on bus lanes for Silver Hill Road in Prince George's County and George Avenue. In conclusion, we ask that SHA rethink major highway expansion projects and redirect investments to reading our equity, economic development, and climate goals. Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us today. Seeing no questions, we appreciate you. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Good to see you. Mr. Pines, have a lovely weekend. Okay, finally, we have Maryland State Police, and we are joined by Madeline Miller. If you would like.
Good afternoon. My name is Madeline Miller, and today we'll be presenting the DLS analysis of the Department of State Police. This department's budget grows by $40.4 million to $615.3 million in fiscal 2025. Most of that growth, over 85%, can be attributed to personnel salary enhancements and the addition of 34 positions. A discussion of the department's managing for results data appears beginning on page 3. The Federal Bureau of Investigation now collects data using the National Incident-Based Reporting System. Jurisdictions in Maryland use a combination of that system called NIBRS and the previous system known as the Summary Reporting System, or SRS, to submit information to the department. The FBI published the last year of its formal using of the SRS methodology in calendar 2020. So for calendar 21 and 2022 in Exhibit 1 on page 4, the information for the national measures is an estimate provided by the FBI, so that the Maryland's SRS data set is comparable. So this shows Part 1 offenses per 100,000 people. Part 1 crimes include murder, rape, aggravated assault, robbery, burglary, larceny, motor vehicle theft, and arson, although this exhibit excludes arson for Maryland and national data. The Maryland crime rate is now lower than that of the nation. For both groups, crime fell in calendar 2020 and 2021, but increased in calendar 2022. In calendar 2022, the national rate was estimated by the FBI to be 2,335 offenses per 100,000 people, while the rate in Maryland was 2,069 offenses. Not all crime rates rose between the calendar years, however, as shown in Exhibit 2 on page 5. Though the murder rate in Maryland declined by 7.6% between 21 and 22, and the national rate declined 6.5%, Maryland's murder rate remains higher. Moving to item 2, traffic fatalities. As a full-service law enforcement agency, traffic enforcement remains a chief responsibility of the department. Between calendar 2019 and 2020, the number of annual vehicle miles traveled fell by 15.9%, while traffic fatalities rose by 7.1% to 573. As shown in Exhibit 3, the traffic fatality rate per 100 million vehicle miles traveled increased by 27.4% to 1.13 fatalities in that period. The fatality rate fell in 21 and 22 to 0.993 fatalities per 100 million vehicle miles traveled. The department's MFR data does not predict the fatalities for calendar 2023, though it does estimate that vehicle miles traveled will increase by 2.9%. MDOT estimates that the number of traffic fatalities in calendar 23 was 605. That increase is concerning. This level would represent a 7.3% increase over calendar 2022. And between calendar 2013 and 2022, the average number of fatalities was approximately 525.7 per year, or 15.1% lower. Exhibit 4 details the number of arrests by the department and other law enforcement agencies, along with the number of impairment-related fatal collisions per 100 million vehicle miles traveled since 2018. There are fewer impairment-related fatal collisions than there were during the pandemic, even as overall vehicle miles traveled recovers. From 21 to 22, the number decreased 29.2% from 187 to 131. In calendar 23, estimated data, DUI arrests increased by 12.6%, and impairment-related fatal collisions continued to fall 23.7%. The third item appears on page 8. The Office of the State Fire Marshal is an agency within the department responsible for statewide fire, arson, and explosive investigations, enforcement of the State Fire Prevention Code, and coordination of fire prevention efforts, as well as the collection of fire incident data. Exhibit 5 at the bottom of the page presents data on the number of fire prevention inspections and re-inspections conducted by the agency, as well as the rate of fire-related deaths that occur per 100,000 people. Inspections have risen relative to pre-pandemic levels, and compared with the number of inspections in calendar 2019, the number of inspections in calendar 2023 increased by 19%. However, the rate of fire-related deaths has increased from 1.17 in 2018 to 1.23 in the calendar 23 estimates. Moving now to a discussion of the department's budget. The allowance totals $615.3 million. Personnel costs represent 81.2% of expenditures throughout the department. The Field Operations Bureau receives 45.7% of the allowance. This bureau oversees 23 police barracks and works to maintain public safety and deter criminal activity. It also accounts for the largest share of personnel, with about 1,283 regular positions and contractual full-time equivalents. The Criminal Investigations Bureau directs the investigation of forensic operations of the department and represents 19.2% of the allowance. And this is where the licensing division is located, which I'll discuss in additional detail later on. The Support Services Bureau receives about 24.8% of overall funding, and this is comprised of 4 commands: personnel, technology, information management, logistics, and the Maryland State Police Aviation, which I'll also discuss later. The remaining 10.3% of the budget includes the Office of the Superintendent, the Vehicle Theft Prevention Council, and the Office of the State Fire Marshal. As shown in Exhibit 7, most of the growth in funding is related to regular position expenses and negotiated salary increases. That is about 85.6% of the change. There's an additional 1.3 million increase that's related. The department receives reimbursable overtime expenses, and that's budgeted with special funds rather than reimbursable funds. But together those amount for 89.1% of the total change between fiscal years. The budget also grows by a net 2.3 million for information technology costs, including the automated licensing and registration tracking system. The department reports that federal and state law changes have necessitated changes to alerts since initiation of the project in calendar 2013. Additional changes made as a result changes to law made as a result of the 2024 session could result in additional changes being necessary to the alerts project. Funding for information technology also increases by 1.5 million for computers and software and 0.7 million for software maintenance for the department's computer-aided dispatch system. Spending also goes in relation to MSPAC as helicopter maintenance costs increase. The funding distribution for MSPAC generally includes 80% special funds from the MEMSOF, and the split is based on the ratio of medically oriented functions to non-medical functions. Costs from MEMSOF were temporarily reduced by funding decisions made via the fiscal 2023 and 2024 budgets. So in recent years, the 80-20 split has not been as exact. Temporarily reduced expenditures in fiscal 22 and 23, combined with the influx of general funds, extended the MEMSOF solvency. DLS and DBM now anticipate that the MEMSOF will become insolvent in fiscal 26. An additional discussion of that fund can be found in the MEMSOF budget overview. One grant program, the Vehicle Theft Prevention Council, is level funded with fiscal 2024 at 3.3 million, including 3.1 million in grant funds. In both fiscal 24 and 25, an additional $1.3 million is authorized in the budget to begin new programs to combat carjackings in addition to car thefts. The department reports that the fund began fiscal 24 with a starting balance of approximately 1.9 million and is now projected to have a closing balance of approximately $700,000. DLS asked that the department comment on how awards for targeting car thefts and carjackings will be met in each of the fiscal 24 and 25. The last item under the proposed budget change chart relates to the supplemental retirement account match. As introduced, the allowance includes approximately $114,000 in general funds budgeted for this sub-program. Because the funds for this purposes are budgeted in DBM, DLS recommends the deletion of these funds. A discussion of the department's personnel complement begins on page 14. The allowance includes an increase of 34 positions, including 6 emergency dispatch positions for the Helicopter Communications Center and 28 civilian administrative specialist positions to support the licensing division. Funding for the 34 new positions does not reflect the standard 25% turnover rate that is typically applied. Therefore, DLS recommends increasing turnover expectancy for all of these new positions to 25%. During the 2023 session, the Senate Budget and Taxation Committee, the Senate Executive Nominations Committee, and the House Appropriations Committee were concerned with the need for improvements in the personnel practices and policies within the department. Funds were restricted pending the submission of two progress reports on the department's efforts to achieve its stated goals related to potential opportunities for such improvements. DSP reports that applicant processing time decreased following the implementation of recruitment and selection dashboards. And it also reports an average applicant processing time of 9 to 12 months and aims to reduce the processing time to an average of 2 to 4. In November of 2023, the department launched its foundational stakeholder project, which is an effort to gather feedback from frontline employees of the department regarding recruiting, performance, promotion, transfers, and improving the department's operations, including increasing morale and retention. It's the first of 5 projects in the Performance Perspectives program the department is launching, and DLS asked the department comment on the results of the foundational stakeholder project and its plans for the Performance Perspectives program. Those changes already made by the department and its Performance Perspectives program have not yet had the opportunity to improve the department's vacancy rate. Overall vacancies are shown for fiscal 2018 through 2024 in Exhibit 8 on page 16. As of January 2024, there were 307 vacant positions, or 12.1% of total regular positions, which is an increase from a year ago when the rate was approximately 11.1%. 43% of those vacant positions have been vacant for over a year. Between fiscal 2018 and 23, the department operated with an average of 10.7% of its sworn and civilian positions vacant, as shown in Exhibit 9 on page 17. The vacancy rate for civilians positions is rising as the department gains new civilian positions. Deficiency appropriation for fiscal 23 added 22 civilian positions for the licensing division and 15 for the gun center. Since fiscal 2018, the number of authorized civilian positions has increased by 19.4% in the working appropriation. The issues section begins on page 18. During the 2021 session, the General Assembly expressed concern with allegations of racial insensitivity and lack of diversity among the department's workforce. The department was directed to convene a diversity study group to develop an action plan to address these concerns, containing specific and measurable goals, to submit the action plan to the General Assembly, along with metrics detailing the current degree of diversity in the department. Additional information was requested in the 2022 and 2023 JCRs as follow-up. Summary information related to workforce diversity is shown in Exhibit 10 in the middle of page 18. One of the actions that the department planned to take under the action plan was to enter into an interagency agreement with Morgan State University. That agreement concluded in June 2023 after the university issued its findings. To conduct its study, MSU moderated focus group discussions in 2 phases, one with employees of the department and the second with community members. The researchers identified several themes and findings through this process for the department to review and improve workplace culture, policies, and operational procedures. Recommendations that resulted from the thematic analysis are summarized in Exhibit 11 on page 19. In response to the findings presented, the department plans to examine the recommendations identified by employee focus group participants as it analyzes existing policies. DSP also envisions a second phase of the workforce assessment study, and we ask that the department comment on its vision for the second phase and provide a timeline in its testimony. The second issue relates to the licensing division. Law changes at the federal and state level have resulted in greater IT investments, a surge in overtime usage, and the addition of positions to support its operations over multiple fiscal years. The number of applicants for handgun permits increased dramatically in calendar 2022 and remained elevated in calendar 23, as shown in Exhibit 12 on page 20. Other application caseloads for the division have also increased over the past decade. Handgun qualification licenses expire 10 years from the date of issuance and may be renewed. So now that the law has been in effect for over a decade, the licensing division must respond to both new applicants and those who are renewing their licenses. And so the numbers of handgun qualification license applications are shown in Exhibit 13 on page 21. So their level of workloads is expected to be higher and for a sustained period in the future. From calendar 2014 to 2019, the number of HQL applications averaged approximately 21,700 per year. And then between calendar 2020 and November of 2023, there were approximately 50,150 applications per year, an increase of 131.1%. As requested through committee narrative in the 2023 JCR, the department has posted information to its website quarterly with the number of applications it receives per quarter and the number of processing days that are required. As this information is useful for understanding how the needs of the division may change over time, DLS recommends adopting committee narrative to request that the quarterly reports continue to be shared with the budget committees. Because the public safety article establishes various requirements related to how quickly a division must turn around an application, the division has required additional personnel to manage increased caseloads, fulfill additional requirements of legislation, and reduce the total overtime needed by the division. The new positions in the allowance will bring its total personnel complement to 152. Overtime usage for processing applications of all types is shown in Exhibit 14. In the first 4 months of calendar 2024, total overtime per month remains 7.8% higher compared with fiscal 2022 data. The third issue relates to the gun center, which was established by Chapter 142 of 2022. Law enforcement agencies must report information to the center. The center must coordinate with 168 law enforcement agencies or over 160 to screen and vet all firearm crimes, and the center must assist with enforcement and violation reduction efforts. Between the working appropriation and the allowance, funding for the gun center increases by 2.1 million, which is closely related to the number of positions that it has. Of the 19 positions in fiscal 24, 14 were vacant as of the end of January. Calls for service for the center were expected to more than double, but this increased workload, while it's beginning to increase, it's not materialized to that level. Given the growth in cases is so low, it's possible that not all law enforcement agencies are reporting information to the center as required. The department does not yet report any MFR data for the gun center, but it will need a database system to have accurate means of tracking its data. Between the working appropriation and the allowance, 2.6 million is included for the database development. This database will enhance data reporting, supporting the tracking of cases throughout the judicial process, and enable better coordination with the licensing division. We ask that the department comment on how vacancies associated with the gun center may be impacting its operations and the progress that is made in acquiring or developing the center's database system. The fourth issue is the NIBRS transition continues. Because numerous reporting agencies remain non-compliant with the new system, the department requires additional time to process and compile data. Approximately 27 contributors in Maryland are not yet compliant with the federal system, and of those 27, 15 have not yet begun testing a new data submission system with the department. Language in the fiscal 24 budget bill restricted $250,000 in general funds pending the submission of the 2022 UCR. This report was submitted on January 4th, and DLS therefore recommends the release of withheld funds and will process a letter to this effect if no objections are raised during the budget hearings. The committees may wish to continue adopting this annual language until the agencies are able to submit complete data by November 1st, and the department can consistently submit the UCR in a timely manner. DLS recommends adding annual budget language for that purpose. The recommended actions are provided on pages 25 and 26, with the remaining pages of the analysis dedicated to appendices. That concludes my presentation, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Madeline. Seeing no questions, Mr. Superintendent, welcome.
Good afternoon, Chair Alford, Senator Jackson. I'm Colonel Roland L. Butler, Secretary of the Maryland Department of State Police. I'm appearing before you today to respond to issues raised and the recommendations contained in the operating budget analysis prepared by DLS analyst Madeline Miller. Thank you, Madeline, for your thorough and professional analysis. With me here today is Mr. John Wilhelm, the Chief Financial Officer. Behind me are some of the department's senior leaders. I truly appreciate this opportunity to share some insights and our responses. The MDSP family dutifully upholds the charge given to us by the citizens of this state and the legislature of serving and protecting those who live, work, and visit our great state. I'm honored to be a member of this family. As I get close to the 1-year mark serving in this role, I find the view from this vantage point unique. From day one, the focus has been on our family and those who may join us in the very near future. Similar to moving into a new home, policies, procedures, and systems are reviewed, and then we make the needed adjustments and refinements to those policies. We're doing exactly that at the MDSP. You may not hear about all the good our organization does, but we assure you we're committed to the tenets of 21st century policing to include building trust and legitimacy with all of our stakeholders. In January, the department announced the results of the annual assessment of best practices conducted by the Commission on Accreditation for Law Enforcement Agencies, better known as CALEA. Notable strengths in the CALEA assessment highlighted the guidelines and procedures related to complaints received by the Internal Affairs Division and the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. The CALEA findings acknowledge that the Maryland Department of State Police uses well-considered written directives to establish administrative and operational work processes to meet accreditation standards and serve the community's needs. The MDSP continues to self-assess and will make changes as needed in order to provide the best service to both the community and our personnel. Refining our management and investment strategies to advance the agency's mission were highlighted in the DLS analysis. While our work is far from over, the MDSP has made significant efforts to better adjust our capabilities and improve our capabilities to serve the public. While it is impossible to summarize the great work our team has been doing, we are proud to share certain milestones, such as the streamlined applicant process for both sworn and civilian personnel, attending almost 150 recruiting events, including HBCUs and military locations, increased community engagement efforts, EEOC training for senior leaders, managers, and supervisors. Our Performance Perspective Program, or P3 program, is created to assess the concerns of the MDSP family, ensuring that 2/3 of our captains and above have completed the International Association of Chiefs of Police leadership training. And finally, a decrease in grievances from our uniformed staff when compared to the previous years. We're extremely proud of our most recent Black History event program, where over 100 guests attended and where almost 70% of those surveyed rated the event as 10 out of 10. We're proud to share that we recently held 2 virtual roundtables focusing on women in the workplace. This included both sworn and civilian personnel, where just under 100 employees participated. Our written testimony provides more specifics and our concurrence with 2 of the DLS recommendations for action. First, we concur with the quarterly reporting on permitting applications administered by our licensing division. Second, we concur with the narrative regarding the uniform crime report. We respectfully do not concur with the 3 remaining actions recommended: the reduction in general funds related to the supplemental retirement match, the increase in the increase in the rate of turnover from 25% to 25% for 34 of our positions. Our Human Resources Division is working diligently to fill open positions. The successes are outlined in our written testimony. Thank you again for this opportunity to discuss the operating budget. Please know that I am available at any time should you wish to discuss any of these concerns. Ma'am, my team and I are happy to answer any questions you or your committee members may have.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Colonel, welcome.
Thanks, sir.
It's just under 1 year. I do appreciate the progress that you've noted. And in your written response, can you talk, I've got a couple. So could you talk about the progress with the UCR reports and your colleagues across the state?
The UCR reports are slightly unusual in that not all departments are using a system that's easy to extract the data needed to complete their reports. We do work diligently with them, but some of those departments are forced to have the data that they have extracted from an older system or a system that's not up to date, obviously, and they're going to have to do that by hand. We work diligently with them to try to get them to meet the deadlines, but at the end of the day, we have to wait on them to produce the product we need to generate that final report to you all.
So a quick question for you, Madam Chair. Has the agency considered, understanding you have your job to do and you are in receipt or waiting to receive, has the agency considered a training component in a conversation with the Chiefs and Sheriffs Association, these folks, to kind of sit down with them and say, hey, look, this reporting is of paramount interest to all parties, and I'm just thinking, how do we get those who are responsible, that owe you information that you are responsible to others for? So is there any consideration, or maybe that's a thought, I'm not sure, to try to, how we nudge folks along?
Can I amplify that?
Yes.
Just perhaps with a suggestion, if you don't do this already, perhaps some pre-training before reports are due. I would suggest it should be mandatory, and please let us know if we could help you with that, but kind of helping to train the locals in exactly what you need from them in advance of the reports being due. Senator, is that kind of what you're thinking of?
Yes, ma'am. And you know, either through the Maryland Sheriff Association or the Maryland Chiefs, or you know, the Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission, you know, and let us know where we need to nudge. That information is it's of great importance to us, and it's frustrating on everybody's part when we don't have it. So.
Understood, and that's certainly something we can consider. One of the things Central Records Division does do is to provide that educational component when they go out and do site audits, just to remind the departments, hey, you have to stay on top of this. There is a product that has to be produced by a given date.
Yes. Interesting. All right, cool. Madam Chair. Secondly, your diversity report. We saw the report. It came out in September, released in September. There's a note that you're looking to look for another report. Can you expound on that?
Kind of an overview of that. That report only included a sampling of 40 employees, and you're talking about 2.5% of the department. Clearly not sufficient to get the temperature or get the perspective of the people that we're looking for. We just recently created an RFP and it's been released. I think it closes in April of 2024 to go out and solicit another vendor. We're not going to disregard what came out of that report. We'll use that as a stepping stone. We're hoping to work with a vendor that was used by one of the sheriff's office down south, that it achieved the results that we were looking for, just in back channel conversations. And one of the things we did with the P3 program, we kind of built the product internally that we could take the temperature of sworn personnel at every level, trooper, mid-level supervisor, upper level supervisor, and we want that to morph into also bringing in the civilian component. So though we're waiting to get that next report done or get that RFP satisfied, we are not sitting on our heels. We're out there trying to find out what's going on, what people are thinking, and allow them to have buy-in on the improvements to the department.
Yeah. Keep us, Madam Chair. Please keep us in the loop, Colonel, as you move forward. You mentioned the program that you've instituted with the female troopers and civilian employees and others. Can you speak to all your any processes you put in place or programs you put in place to address any concerns of any minority members or diverse members within your agency?
The program we started with the women's program to address the concerns of women in the workplace, it's something we were looking at doing a panel of leaders in law enforcement that could sit down and talk to people, both sworn and civilian women, how they're impacted by the job itself and what they experience. One of the things in putting together that panel, we're going to include administrators from different departments, and it's hard to marry up those schedules. So what we started out with is using technology, leverage that to our advantage to get people together, have two discussions, get them talking. So as this grows, we get more and more participation. In addition to that, we're looking at a task force to address the needs of all minorities and all people within the department to get feedback. We're looking to touch different groups as far as the members of that panel and how we extract that data and how we get those conversations going. The biggest concern, me and my members of my executive command staff, we don't want this to be just a one-shot drop in the bucket. People have to know that the lines of communication will remain open. We all depend on one another. Everyone is important in this workforce, foreign, civilian, male, female. Everybody has a say. We want everybody to have some buy-in in the future of the department.
And let me just state on the record, the reason I have a number of statements, comments, questions for you is, you know, this is our first meeting with you this session. So, but I appreciate that when you're saying that. I also know in the report that you had a meeting with the Black Troopers Association back in September.
Yes.
You know, so Colonel, do me a favor. Because most of the information we got came from that particular organization, but others. And so for any information that we got, I'm sure you also got, we are asking you to keep us in queue on, you know, as part of your check-ins to let us know where we are. You know, the more things that can be taken care of, I said it earlier today, the 9 months versus coming here. here we're supposed to be looking at your budget. That's what we want to do. Those other matters, we want to be your partners to ensure that, I caution myself by saying this, and I talked about this before, but when you think about public safety in the state of Maryland, law enforcement in particular, you think of Maryland State Police. We need to think about the services that Maryland State Police provides, the other matters that are internal to any agency and anybody that any working environment. Those things need to be handled where they need to be handled. So we want to work with you to get to that point where matters that are of concern get addressed prior to us coming to the budget hearings, and our doors are open. It's only 4 of us on this subcommittee. So I would encourage you to touch each and every one of us with any concern that you have, or your staff, and feel free to do that. So I want to make sure I say that to you publicly. But can you tell me about the outreach to those who were of concern, in addition to that September? And if that's the date, then that's the date. If you could just speak to that, I'd appreciate it.
The outreach to those.
The outreach that you have had, or those who have had some
It took us a while
concerns.
to arrange some of these
Gotcha.
meetings. Can't say why, 'cause scheduling, it just took a while to get those meetings arranged. Not only did they meet with me, they met with the director of ODEI.
Okay.
They also had a chance to meet with my senior advisor, who's present today, Mr. Lawson. We're looking at the foster lines of communication. You've been very candid with us. We appreciate that. We're looking to communicate with the legislature to make sure you understand what's going on, where the state police is headed. In addition to that, we want to make sure, no matter what the feedback is, that we understand the concerns of the other parties. There's a two-way exchange there, and I think we can alleviate a lot of things as long as people are willing to sit down in the room and to talk about things openly.
Thank you. And I think this may be my last one for now, Madam Chair. So oftentimes in the public safety environment, recruiting, retention, those matters, we end up with long-term acting positions. I'm not sure how many you have on the agency currently, or what do you consider, or your team considers long-term, that you need to kind of get that extra boost to say, hey, look, I need to get this position filled and not have someone in that acting position so in such a long period of time, because it's not good for succession planning and leadership development. And so again, we want to be your partner, but we need to be able to identify those. It's your agency, Colonel, but we can help you.
Certainly so. And when I took over, one of the things I was concerned about was the assessment of the department. Were we a little top heavy? Where do we have people we could move them around before we started with the promotion process? Obviously, we want to fill those positions. We're working diligently to do so. I can't speak on the number that we have. I know off the field operations side,
You
but
can get it back to us.
okay.
Yeah, please. Thank you. Appreciate that. And lastly, there's been a couple of pieces of legislation that we put forth, and we've had a terrific working relationship with the Troopers Association, Leola, and even with the Black Troopers Association, because I know when we did the 2 additional years for the drop, there was a concern year 1 when I tried to put that piece of legislation in about the upward mobility, or the lack of it, or the compression that it would cause. So we're thank you all for working with us on that piece of legislation. That's important for your agency and your retention. And then last year we were able to come back and lift that age restriction because I know the Maryland State Police will make sure that their folks are fit to serve. So thank you, Colonel, and look forward to continuing our conversation as we move forward, as you progress.
Thank you,
your
Senator.
agency. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, I do have a couple questions, just piggybacking off of what Senator Jackson just mentioned. I think we appreciate you inherited a lot of the challenges as everybody in this new administration has. That being said, I believe your goal is to foster long-term trust for you and everybody who works for the department. To that point about Black troopers, Leola, female troopers, Latino troopers, do you have consistent meetings with kind of the various groups represented, or can you just give us a
We're in
sense of how?
constant contact with Leola and the MTA.
Okay.
Those meetings were a little easier to get there and keep those lines of communications open. Some you have to work a little bit more, but it doesn't mean that you're closed off to any discussion with anyone.
Right.
We're actively engaging those groups, and we want to hear from those groups.
This is when we had other, I'm not going to name names, when we have had other departments here with, other equally challenging issues with personnel and vacancy rates and things like that, we just highly recommend a regular, constant communication and meeting, standing meeting schedule with some of the folks who work with you. I think that just fosters greater trust and collaboration. Just a recommendation. Totally not covered in the report, but something I near and dear to my heart is our state labs. Can you speak, and I appreciate we recently, just a few years back, built a new one. Can you speak a little bit, and if you don't have the answers today, that's okay, because we didn't prep, but demand versus capacity of those state labs to actually test evidence produced throughout the state versus having to send things out of state or to private labs?
Without delving down to the exact numbers, the Western Maryland lab is the one I'm assuming you're referring to on the top floor of the new Hagerstown barrack or the newer barrack. It's done wonders to alleviate what we were sending to headquarters. We've taken a lot of strain off of headquarters. We're looking forward to the new Berlin barrack being completed July of 2024, which will have a state-of-the-art lab. Not only will that help those counties overrun the shore, it'll help with recruiting. It'll help with what people see that's attracted to them. Not everybody wants to be a law enforcement officer. Some people, they want to get to the analytical side of things. They want to be that person that works in the crime lab to help solve those crimes. We're hoping we can foster relationships on Maryland's Eastern Shore, particularly with the HBCU over there, to get interns in and open people's eyes to the Maryland State Police. I think one of the things we found, a lot of people come with one perception, and after they're there for a little bit of time, they start to change their perspective and they're like, hey, I'd like to do something else within the department. But the key is getting them in the door and letting them see a state-of-the-art facility and having them understand that they're probably a part of something that's a lot greater than they originally anticipated.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Any further questions for Colonel Butler?
Thank you. Madam Chair, I'll just reiterate, it's your agency. However, we should not be in receipt of internal matters. Right. And so the more that your agency and your command can reach out and touch the folks in the agency, I understand where you are. Trust me, been there, done that. And I've learned the hard way. But at the end of the day, you document your touches. You talk to us the 9 months because, we should be partners and we're good as we move forward. So.
Thank you, Colonel, and thank you, your team, for being here today. And with that, we are adjourned. But wait, we have one more on Monday. We have Alcohol, Tobacco, and Cannabis Commission Monday in this room at 1, and that is our final budget hearing of the season. Thank you all very much. Have a lovely weekend.